You arrive in a world that feels both familiar and impossibly distant. The air itself seems heavier, tinged with smoke, damp earth, and the steady scent of livestock. Medieval Europe does not announce itself with fanfare, it settles quietly around you, its sounds and smells creeping into your senses the way dawn moves into a field, slowly and without asking your permission. If you have come here with modern expectations, you must set them aside quickly. This age is built upon rhythms, and each rhythm has been shaped by generations who rarely questioned why things were done the way they were. You stand in the middle of these habits, and even the smallest misstep can make you appear strange. In a place where strangeness and danger often sit close together, fitting in becomes less a matter of courtesy and more a matter of survival. You first notice the roads, if they can be called that. They are narrow, uneven, and marked by ruts so deep that wagons groan as they pass through. The mud clings to your shoes with a determination you did not expect. Villagers walking past give you brief, assessing glances. Their expressions are not unfriendly, but they are cautious. In this age, no one wastes time smiling at strangers, especially those who look lost. Here, a stranger could be a messenger, a runaway, a thief, or a source of unwanted trouble. No one assumes the best. You must remember that greetings in this world are brief. A simple nod is safer than a wave, which could be interpreted as a signal or an attempt to draw attention. Do not extend your hand first. Many people in this era associate close contact with illness, labor obligations, or unexpected demands. When someone does offer a hand, it is usually a person of at least moderate standing who feels confident enough to initiate the gesture. Until then, keep your hands visible, but still. As you walk toward the nearest settlement, you will hear the muddled clamor of life long before you see it. Dogs bark in the distance, cartwheels crunch over gravel, and somewhere a smith's hammer beats its steady rhythm against metal. When you finally enter the village, noise and movement fill the narrow lanes. Children dart between buildings, chickens scatter across your path, and the smell of cooking lard drifts from an open hearth. It is important to note that people in medieval Europe are rarely alone. Individuals are defined by their ties to family, village, lord, or guild. To wander without a clear affiliation makes you noteworthy in the wrong way. If someone asks where you have come from, choose a direction rather than a named place. Many settlements share common titles like St. Mary's or St. Peter's, enough that no one will question your answer. You only need to offer a distance vague enough not to invite follow-up questions. Travelers in this era frequently describe journeys in days rather than miles, and doing the same will help you blend in. The clothing you wear may be your greatest challenge. Even if you have tried to arrive prepared, medieval eyes immediately recognize unfamiliar stitching, odd dyes, or cloth too fine for your apparent status. Fortunately, you can resolve this without attracting suspicion. Villages often host small cloth markets, where you can obtain woolen garments in common colors like brown, gray, or muted green. Keep in mind that brighter shades are associated with wealth and should be avoided unless you intend to explain your station. A poorly dressed person, claiming noble status, draws more suspicion than respect. As you observe daily life around you, you will notice that most people speak softly, especially indoors. Loud speech is associated with quarrels, drunkenness, or commands from authority. This is not a world where people raise their voices without reason. When you speak, match the tone of those around you. Gentle speech marks you as sensible, and in a society where good sense is valued more than bravado, this can make your presence less alarming. Once settled within the village, you may face another early difficulty: understanding their practical fear of illness. In medieval Europe, disease is an expected part of life, and people guard themselves against it in ways that may seem superstitious. Do not scoff when a villager hangs a sprig of herbs above a doorway or spits lightly on the ground to ward off misfortune. These are habits meant to bring comfort in a world without reliable medical knowledge. Mocking them could mark you as an outsider, or worse, as someone who invites misfortune upon others. Respecting boundaries will serve you well. If a villager keeps a certain distance while speaking to you, match that distance. If someone steps aside for you to pass, nod politely and continue walking without lingering. People of this era associate hesitation with uncertainty, and uncertainty with deception. Simply knowing where to place your feet and how to carry yourself can ease many concerns before they arise. Should you find yourself invited into a home, you must observe the customs carefully. It is polite to remove your hat, bow your head slightly to the household, and remain standing until you are offered a seat. Medieval homes are often dim, heated by a single hearth, and filled with the smell of boiling broth or drying herbs. You may be offered food, even if the family has little to spare. Accept it with gratitude. Refusing hospitality is considered rude, but asking for more is worse. Do not speak freely of the future. Even vague references to events yet to come can unsettle people who see the world in terms of divine will. Predictions belong either to priests or to the kind of travelers no one wishes to meet. If you must explain your unusual knowledge, claim it comes from a distant monastery or an elderly teacher whose name no one will know. Medieval people respect learned figures, but expect humility. Anything else might be mistaken for pride. As you watch life unfold in this settlement, you begin to recognize its quiet rhythm. People rise early, often before sunrise, preparing tools, tending fires, and beginning the tasks that define their days. Women carry baskets toward communal wells, where they gather water that must be hauled carefully to avoid spilling. Men step into fields or workshops, performing labor they learned as children. Elderly villagers sit near doorways, watching life pass with the patience of those who have seen it all before. It becomes clear that medieval survival depends less on dramatic action and more on understanding how to move through the world without disrupting its balance. If you can grasp that balance, you will find that the people around you slowly begin to treat you as one of their own. But if you fail to adapt, even the most harmless misunderstandings can grow into suspicion. And yet, as evening settles and smoke rises in gentle curls from hearths across the village, a question lingers quietly in your mind. Now that you have taken your first steps into this world, what other challenges will reveal themselves when night finally arrives, and how will you navigate the unseen dangers that daylight has not yet shown? The quiet of night in a medieval village is not the silence you might expect. It carries a different kind of stillness, filled with sounds that echo from places hidden in the dark. A dog barks far beyond the boundary of the settlement. A wooden shutter creaks as the wind moves across a wall built from timber and wattle. In the distance, an owl calls out in a slow rhythm, repeating itself as if announcing its presence to anyone awake. When you first arrived, you may have believed that darkness would bring rest. Instead, it brings awareness. This world feels both secure and strangely vulnerable once the sun has set. If you step outside after dusk, you must move carefully. Medieval villagers walk with purpose even in the dark. You will notice that many carry small lanterns carved from horn or thin strips of scraped wood. Their light is soft, not meant to brighten the night so much as to keep the path in view. Should you choose to carry a light, make sure it resembles one of theirs. A flame too bright might mark you as careless. A flame too dim might cause you to stumble. Balance matters here, and villagers respect those who understand the value of measured actions. During your first days in this world, you will learn that medieval people divide their time less by hours and more by natural signals. The ringing of a church bell, the change in the sky's color, or the shifting sounds in the marketplace control their movements. In many places, only the church keeps any consistent track of time, and even those records drift slightly with the seasons. If someone asks when you arrived, or how long you have stayed, they do not expect a precise answer. Phrases like early morning or near sunset, or sometime after the bell will be enough. As daylight returns and the village begins its morning routine, you notice how quickly work resumes. Children gather near the edges of the fields, helping with small tasks such as collecting kindling or guiding livestock toward grazing land. Women begin the long labor of preparing food, kneeling beside low tables and mixing coarse flour with water drawn from the well. Men repair fences, sharpen tools, or step into fields already divided into narrow strips that have been used by the same families for generations. This is the quiet strength of medieval Europe, not the battles sung by poets, but the patient repetition of work done by countless hands. If you expect anything dramatic, you will find that this world resists the idea. Its true force lies in routine. To survive here, you must learn the social structure that shapes every interaction. The villagers know their place in a hierarchy that is both simple and deeply rooted. At the top stands the local lord, or the steward appointed to oversee the land. Below them are free tenants, bound tenants, laborers, and tradespeople whose ranks vary by skill and wealth. Each person understands their obligations, and each expects you to understand your own. This does not mean you must declare a status immediately, but you must avoid appearing superior without reason. People in this era judge character by actions rather than words. If you offer help when needed, avoid drawing unnecessary attention, and speak with calm steadiness, you will gradually be placed into a comfortable social position without forcing it. In time, you may notice that villagers often discuss matters of farming, weather, and harvest. These topics form the foundation of their daily concerns. When you speak with them, choose simple subjects first. You might remark on the soil's dampness, the behavior of birds, or the scent of rain carried by a changing breeze. These comments show that you observe the world as they do. Conversations built upon shared observations help you fit into the village without suspicion. One of the most important habits to adopt is modest curiosity. Ask questions about tasks, tools, and customs in a respectful tone. A villager will explain how a scythe must be sharpened, or why certain herbs hang above a doorway. They enjoy sharing knowledge when asked gently, and doing so will teach you much about how to behave. But never ask too many questions at once. A person who seems too eager to learn everything at once may appear strange or intrusive. As days pass, you begin to understand the importance of communal effort. Tasks here rarely belong to one person alone. Men and women often work side by side during planting or harvesting seasons. Neighbors help repair damaged roofs. Children gather berries and carry messages. Life moves forward only through cooperation. If you appear unwilling to join in such work, others may interpret it as laziness or secrecy. If you volunteer too often, it might seem as though you are trying to gain favor. Balance once again becomes your ally. Food in medieval Europe is simpler than you may expect, but it carries meaning beyond nourishment. Bread serves as the foundation of most meals, though its quality varies widely depending on the season and the region. Some bread is made from fine wheat, while other bread contains barley, rye, oats, or even ground peas. The thickness of the crust, the coarseness of the crumb, and the darkness of the loaf all reveal small clues about a family's standing. When eating with others, you must follow their customs carefully. Tear bread with your hands rather than biting directly into a large piece. Keep your elbows close and your movements calm. Do not appear startled by unfamiliar flavors. Many dishes use herbs to mask the taste of aging ingredients, or to add warmth to broths that simmer all day. Be grateful for whatever is placed before you, even if your modern palate hesitates. In moments of rest, you may notice the rhythm of conversation around you. Villagers do not speak in long, elaborate sentences. They prefer steady, practical tones, shaped by years of physical labor. Silence is common and not considered uncomfortable. If you remain quiet for a time, no one will wonder why. In fact, silence often signals thoughtfulness, a trait respected in this world, where careful action can mean the difference between a successful harvest and a hungry winter. Eventually you will encounter the local church. Even if only in passing, its bells shape the daily schedule of the village, calling people to prayer or marking feast days throughout the year. You are not expected to know every ritual or custom, but you must show respect. Enter quietly, lower your head when others kneel, and avoid speaking during moments of reflection. If someone asks about your faith, respond with simple acknowledgement. In this era, belief is woven into daily life without the need for constant explanation. There is one more element of medieval village life you must understand to survive here: the power of reputation. A single rumor can spread quickly, shaping how others view you long before you realize what has happened. People exchange news near the well, at the marketplace, or while tending livestock. Even a harmless comment spoken at the wrong moment can turn into a tale that grows larger with each retelling. That is why you must remain consistent. If you say you come from a distant settlement, do not change your story later. If you claim to know a craft such as weaving or tool repair, be prepared to demonstrate a basic skill. If you admit uncertainty, do so with humility rather than fear. A person who appears honest, steady, and thoughtful will gain trust far more quickly than someone who seems unpredictable. As you continue to observe life in the village, you may begin to recognize patterns that once escaped your notice. People pause before stepping through doorways. They glance at the sky before beginning a task. They speak with a rhythm shaped by years of shared labor and mutual need. These patterns will guide you, as long as you respect them. But just as you grow more comfortable with this world, you may sense that something remains just outside your understanding. Why do the villagers whisper when certain travelers arrive? Why do some homes lock their shutters tightly on nights when the moon is thin? And what unspoken rules must you learn before the next turning of the season brings new challenges that a newcomer like you may not yet be prepared to face? As the days stretch into weeks, you begin to feel that medieval Europe is no longer a place you merely observe. It becomes a place you move through with steady footsteps, each one shaped by habits you never imagined adopting. What once seemed foreign now feels familiar. The uneven roads, the slow grind of mill wheels, the distant call of livestock at dawn, all settle into your mind like the steady rhythm of a drum. But surviving here means understanding more than surface customs. It means learning the deeper principles that hold this society together. The first of these principles is interdependence. Medieval villagers rely on one another to a degree that modern visitors rarely grasp. Every task is linked to another task, every craft to another craft, and every person to a network of obligations that stretches far beyond the borders of the settlement. When you wake in the morning, the smell of bread rising from a neighbor's house reminds you that grain must be milled before it becomes dough, and fields must be worked before they produce grain. One person's labor supports another's survival, and this balance continues in an endless cycle. Understanding this interdependence is essential, because it influences every social expectation. If you offer help without being asked, it may signal good manners. If you refuse help, even politely, it may signal distrust. When someone assists you in minor tasks, a return gesture is expected in due time. You must never ignore such obligations. To do so would be seen as disrespectful and could damage your standing in the village. A person with no ties or favors owed may remain a stranger indefinitely. Another principle you must learn involves land. Medieval Europe is shaped by the concept of holding land rather than owning it. Fields are rented, borrowed, inherited, or redistributed according to long-standing customs. Even the poorest laborers may have access to shared grazing lands, forest resources, or rights to hunt small game. When you walk through the countryside, each strip of field belongs to someone, though the ownership may not be obvious. Stepping off the path without permission is more than an inconvenience. It is a breach of order. In time, villagers will teach you that rights to land often change with the seasons. After harvest, livestock may graze freely on certain fields. When planting begins, those rights vanish. If you observe these rules carefully, you will avoid trouble. If you forget them, even by accident, you risk appearing careless or arrogant. Here, a single footprint in the wrong place can cause more harm than you expect. Beyond land, there is also the matter of authority. Medieval villagers live under a hierarchy that is both simple and firm. The local lord or steward holds power, but that power is exercised through officials such as reeves, bailiffs, and clerks. These men keep records, manage disputes, and supervise taxes. Their presence is not meant to intimidate, though it often does. Most villagers approach them with quiet respect. If you are summoned by one of these officials, speak plainly and avoid unnecessary detail. A long explanation may seem like an attempt to deceive. When you attend village gatherings, you may notice that the tone changes depending on who is present. If an official stands among the crowd, conversations grow more careful. People choose their words with intention. If only villagers gather, the tone loosens. They discuss crops, animals, and the slow passage of the seasons. You must learn to shift with the group. A misplaced comment in the presence of authority can cause misunderstandings that linger. You will also encounter moments of conflict. Medieval villagers are patient, but they are not free from frustration. Arguments arise over boundaries, livestock, or debts. If you witness such a dispute, remain still and silent. This is not the moment to offer your opinion. A stranger who interferes in local matters may be asked questions they cannot answer. Allow the villagers to resolve their own quarrels, for their methods have been shaped by generations of lived experience. During your time in the village, you may also learn about customs related to seasons and weather. Villagers observe the world carefully, using small signals to make decisions that determine their survival. The arrival of migratory birds indicates changing temperatures. The color of the sky at sunrise hints at the likelihood of rain. The blossoming of certain plants marks the beginning of planting. These observations guide everything from gathering firewood to predicting the length of winter. If you wish to show respect, you must pay attention to these details. When someone comments on the behavior of animals or the condition of the soil, listen closely. These remarks are not small talk. They are essential information. Responding with interest demonstrates that you understand the seriousness of their concerns. You will also notice the role of shared spaces. Wells, ovens, and grazing fields all serve the community rather than individuals. These areas are carefully managed to prevent disputes. When you approach a communal space, do so with patience. Wait your turn at the well. Ask before using an oven that serves multiple households. Move livestock gently, if it is your responsibility to guide them. These simple acts of courtesy build trust. Over time, you might find yourself spending more moments in the company of elders. These villagers possess knowledge that stretches back decades. They remember poor harvests, harsh winters, and years of abundance. They can tell you which paths flood during storms, which fields produce the strongest barley, and which families have lived in the village longer than memory can record. Listening to them not only teaches survival, but also helps you understand the rhythm of life in this place. Some evenings, as you sit near the hearth of a neighbor's home, you may hear stories that mix history with belief. People recount events involving strange lights in the sky, unexpected illnesses, or the misfortune of livestock that fell ill without explanation. They speak of these things in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. They do not claim certainty, but they trust the patterns they have observed. You must respond to such stories with respect. To dismiss them outright would mark you as someone who believes too strongly in ideas that have no place here. As you grow more familiar with the community, you may be invited to join larger gatherings. Feasts, celebrations, or harvest meals bring together families from across the village. These events often take place in open fields, where long wooden tables are arranged in rows. People bring bread, cheese, dried fruits, or roasted meats. The atmosphere is warm, but the conversation remains modest. Loud boasting or excessive laughter can draw unwanted attention. If you wish to take part, do so quietly, offering help when needed, and showing gratitude for whatever is shared. In such gatherings, music may fill the air. Simple instruments like pipes, drums, or small stringed instruments accompany folk songs that villagers have known since childhood. These songs tell stories of labor, love, or endurance. Their melodies drift across the fields, steady and soothing. Listening to them helps you understand how this world preserves memory without written words. Despite the peace of these moments, the village is not without challenges. Illness can arrive without warning. Harvests can fail. Unexpected weather can disrupt months of preparation. In such times, villagers depend on one another more than ever. They share food carefully, rationing whatever they can. They visit the sick and tend fires through long nights. They repair tools and rebuild fences, even when exhausted. If you remain steady and helpful during such hardships, you gain a place in the quiet fabric of village life. People begin to greet you by name. Children wave at you from doorways. Elders nod as you pass. In a world where survival depends on community, such connections become essential. But even as you settle into this world, an awareness lingers at the edge of your thoughts. You have learned much about how to avoid offense, how to move quietly within the customs of medieval life, and how to earn trust without deceit. And yet, a question remains. As you continue to travel through this age, what will happen when you encounter a community that follows different customs, different rules, or different ways of understanding the world than the one you have grown used to? What challenges will you face beyond this village, and how will you adapt when the next place expects something entirely different of you? When you first step onto a medieval road, you might expect something well-marked or thoughtfully arranged, but what you will find instead is a series of paths shaped more by habit than design. These roads are not built from stone unless you stand near a major city or an old Roman site where the remnants of earlier engineering still endure. Most of the time, you walk along packed earth that shifts with every season. Rain softens it into mud, frost hardens it into uneven ridges. Summer heat dries it into a brittle surface that cracks beneath your feet. Each version presents its own challenge, and every traveler learns to adapt. At dawn, when the roads begin to fill with movement, you notice a pattern almost immediately. People travel slowly, not because they lack urgency, but because they respect the hazards of the road. A misstep can twist an ankle, break a cartwheel, or damage goods meant for trade. Those who walk move at a steady, deliberate pace. Those who ride horses or donkeys sit upright, guiding their animals with gentle pressure rather than constant force. This is a world where travel teaches patience long before it teaches anything else. You will soon discover that medieval roads are not solitary spaces. They are shared with shepherds guiding flocks toward distant pastures, merchants carrying cloth or salt from one settlement to another, clerics journeying between churches, and messengers who ride with messages sealed in wax. Each traveler steps aside when needed, nodding in quiet acknowledgement. Speaking often is unnecessary. A simple gesture communicates respect, caution, and a willingness to share the path. If you pay close attention, you begin to see that the road itself tells a story. The deepest footprints belong to carts carrying heavy loads, their wheels carving grooves into the earth. The lighter marks belong to travelers on foot. Every line, rut, and indentation reveals the invisible movement of countless people who walked here long before you. Villagers can read these signs without effort. They know when a herd of livestock has passed recently, when a merchant caravan moved through the night, or when the tracks indicate a newcomer unfamiliar with the terrain. You will also notice that distances in medieval Europe are rarely described in exact terms. People speak of travel as a matter of days or steady walking, not specific measurements. You may hear that a certain town is a day's journey from the next, or that a market is 2 evenings beyond the riverside settlement. These descriptions reflect both experience and practicality. No one expects precision, because the condition of the road changes constantly. What takes one traveler a short day might take another a long one, depending on weather, animals, and supplies. As you follow the road, you will eventually encounter crossroads. These points serve as natural gathering spots. Merchants rest their animals. Messengers drink water from small wooden cups carried on their belts. Travelers adjust their packs, or exchange news. In such places, information flows more freely than in the villages themselves. You may hear stories of distant regions, rumors of weather patterns, or reports of changing market prices. Listening closely teaches you far more than asking direct questions. Roads act as threads that weave different communities together, and crossroads become the knots that hold the threads in place. After some hours of walking, you may hear the sound of a distant river. Waterways often run close to roads, offering both guidance and sustenance. Travelers refill their flasks or lead animals to drink. The rivers also help you navigate, since many medieval roads follow their curves to avoid steep hills and dense forests. As you walk alongside the water, you can feel the air grow cooler. The movement of the current brings a sense of calm, and you begin to understand why these routes have survived for generations. Nature itself shapes the road, yet the road offers more than practical benefits. It shapes culture, words, customs, and even small everyday habits spread along these paths. A village may learn a new method of preserving fish, because a traveler once mentioned it. A distant monastery may adopt a tune hummed by shepherds who passed by on pilgrimage. Every person traveling the road contributes to a slow exchange of practices, beliefs, and skills. This exchange happens so gradually that no one notices until years later, when the idea has taken root. Travel, however, is not free from risk. Bands of thieves may hide near wooded stretches, waiting for those who walk alone. Travelers know to join groups when possible. Even if the group is temporary, it offers protection. When you walk with others, you take turns keeping watch. You share small amounts of food or water. You speak softly around the fire, allowing the crackle of kindling to fill the silence. These shared moments strengthen trust among strangers and help everyone reach their destination with fewer dangers. In time, you might notice a rhythm in the movement of people. Pilgrims walk in clusters, carrying staffs marked by wear. Their pace is steady, driven by devotion rather than haste. Merchants move with determination, because their income depends on reaching markets on time. Farmers traveling to fairs with livestock move more slowly, guiding animals that tire easily. Travelers returning home walk with relaxed shoulders, savoring the familiar path. Each type of traveler has a distinct presence, and learning to recognize them helps you anticipate the flow of the road. Along your journey, you may encounter roadside inns. They are simple structures built from timber and plaster, offering beds made from straw and meals of thick soups or coarse bread. The warmth of the hearth welcomes you as soon as you step inside. Travelers sit at long tables, eating quietly or exchanging stories in low voices. Innkeepers observe everything with careful attention, remembering faces, accents, and local rumors. If you stay the night, you should behave respectfully and pay promptly. Such places are trusted because they provide shelter, and maintaining that trust is essential for everyone who depends on them. As night falls, the road transforms. Darkness settles quickly, and without the presence of lanterns, the path becomes difficult to follow. Many travelers prefer to rest rather than continue through the night. Those who must travel in darkness do so with extreme caution. The night conceals hazards, from tree roots to hidden ruts in the earth. The faint glow of the moon helps, but only slightly. When you find a place to rest, you hear the wind moving through branches overhead and animals stirring in the distance. The road sleeps lightly, never fully silent but always subdued. When morning returns, the first light reveals the outlines of travelers preparing to continue their journey. The air feels crisp, carrying the scent of damp soil and crushed grass. You rise, adjust your pack, and join the slow procession. As you walk, you begin to understand that the medieval road is not simply a path from one place to another. It is a living corridor shaped by centuries of footsteps, voices, and shared experiences. Eventually, you may come upon a bridge. In medieval Europe, bridges are not common, and many crossings rely on shallow fords instead. When a bridge does appear, it often reflects the resources or influence of the nearby community. Some are built from heavy timber, reinforced by simple supports. Others, especially those near cities or monastic estates, are shaped from stone and designed to last for generations. When you cross such a bridge, you feel the weight of countless others who stood upon the same stones long before you. Travelers often pause on bridges. They look at the water, listen to its steady movement, and reflect on their journey. You may find yourself doing the same. Perhaps you think about the villages you have passed, the people you met, or the stories that weave quietly along the length of the road. The bridge becomes a place where movement slows and thought expands. As you continue further, you begin to notice subtle differences between regions. The accents change, the shape of houses shifts, the types of crops planted beside the road vary slightly. These differences appear gradually, revealing the diversity of a continent woven together by roads that never quite look the same from one day to the next. The more you travel, the more you recognize that the road itself is a teacher, showing you how communities adapt to the landscapes that surround them. With each passing day, you grow more accustomed to the quiet endurance required to walk these ancient paths. You learn to carry only what is necessary. You learn to identify signs of changing weather. You learn to step aside for passing carts without disturbing their load. You learn to observe without intruding, to listen without pressing, and to speak only when needed. And yet, as you follow the winding road deeper into medieval Europe, a question lingers in your mind. If these simple paths hold so much history, so many stories, and so much quiet resilience, what might you discover when the road finally leads you to a place where the flow of life changes entirely? And how will you prepare yourself for the moment when the familiar rhythm of the road gives way to the unpredictability of a bustling medieval town? You continue your quiet walk through the imagined lanes of medieval Europe, moving deeper into the world of the builders, whose names were rarely recorded yet, whose work remains standing centuries later. In the first part of this story, you explored the beginning of a mason's day, the hierarchy of the craft, and the practical meaning of belonging to a world built on stone and slow learning. Now in this second section, you step further into the daily mechanisms of medieval stonework culture. It is here, in the unhurried rhythm of shaping rock, hauling timber, and following strict procedures, that you find the true heartbeat of medieval construction. You are not yet at the dramatic rise of a completed fortress or cathedral. Instead, you are in the quieter middle, where the work becomes routine, where progress is measured, not in leaps but in inches, and where you observe how a craft shaped not just buildings but the people who worked on them. You shift your attention to the social fabric that existed around a building site. A long-term construction project, such as a church or the outer wall of a town, did not simply employ masons. It attracted carpenters, teamsters, blacksmiths, mortar mixers, lime burners, and stone haulers. Even families sometimes followed the projects, if the work lasted for many years. Many of these individuals shared meals, tools, and skills. Some worked together for decades, forming a community that drifted from site to site. Professional identity defined them more strongly than birthplace or even family line. You would find that a mason from the northern coast and a mason from the southern valleys understood each other far better than they understood the farmers who lived only a few houses away from the site. By the middle stages of a project, you would see an established rhythm. A workday might begin with the steady grind of the treadwheel crane coming to life. Two men walked inside the giant wooden wheel, turning it with the force of their bodies so that heavy blocks could be lifted. Their steps were slow and repetitive, a form of controlled marching, because even a moment of imbalance could cause the crane to sway. Watching them work felt a bit like observing a clock mechanism. They rarely spoke while inside the wheel, conserving their breath and attention. If you were a visitor, you would be warned to stay well away from the rope line. Nearby, you would find the mortar yard. Lime, sand, and water mixed in shallow pits, forming the thick, sticky substance that would bind stones together. The workers here had rough hands, chalk-white clothing, and faces often dusted with powder. Mortar had to be mixed to the correct consistency, neither too wet nor too dry. Too much sand, and the wall weakened. Too much water, and it sagged during drying. The workers relied on experience more than exact measurement. If you asked how they knew a batch was correct, they might pick up a handful, squeeze it between their fingers, and say that it simply felt right. Scaffolding rose level by level beside the half-built structure. Woodworkers constantly repaired and replaced the timbers, because wind, rain, and daily strain weakened them. Safety regulations as you know them did not exist. Instead, people relied on caution, repetition, and shared responsibility. When you climbed a scaffold, you trusted the carpenter who set the braces and the mason who hammered in the pegs. You also trusted your own memory of each plank's placement, because you often used the same walkways day after day. A misstep was rarely forgiven by gravity. Meals on the worksite were plain and predictable. Workers usually ate a small meal of bread, cheese, or porridge early in the morning, then a larger midday meal provided by the master mason or by the hiring authority. In many towns, this might be funded by the local lord or church council. Thick stews, ale, cured fish, and seasonal vegetables were common. These meals served not only as nourishment, but as informal meetings. Workers talked about weather, wages, and progress. The master mason listened while appearing not to listen. He needed harmony among his workers, because conflict slowed the work far more than a rainy day. You might be surprised at how much the weather influenced everything. A sudden frost in late autumn ruined fresh mortar. Heavy rains delayed lifting operations and made scaffolding slippery. Strong winds forced crane teams to halt completely. A long dry season cracked lime pits and forced water carriers to fetch supplies from farther sources. Even the direction of sunlight mattered, because shadows made fine carving more difficult. A medieval construction site was at the mercy of the sky. Masons learned to adapt through patience, not through resistance. Beyond the practical routines, you notice a cultural world woven deeply into the craft. Many builders believed that stones carried a memory of the earth, and shaping them properly required respect. Certain quarries were considered better not purely for physical qualities, but for their age and the purity believed to be within them. Rituals appeared in subtle forms. Some masons muttered a short blessing before placing a cornerstone. Others carved tiny symbols on hidden sections of blocks for good luck. These acts were rarely discussed openly, yet nearly everyone practiced them in some form. Some workdays were devoted entirely to solving structural problems. A wall leaning outward by the width of a finger was a crisis. The master mason had to determine whether the foundation had shifted, whether the stones were unevenly loaded, or whether a row of blocks had been poorly aligned. Work halted during these assessments. You can imagine the uneasy silence as workers waited for the verdict. A serious deviation meant dismantling and rebuilding, adding days or even weeks to the schedule. Medieval masons did not rush to finish. They rushed only to avoid mistakes that could endanger the entire structure. At this stage of a project, you would also observe the education of apprentices intensifying. The tasks became more complex. Instead of shaping simple rectangular blocks, they learned to carve curved pieces for arches or precise angled stones for corners. They practiced chiseling decorative patterns, even if their work would later be hidden behind plaster. A master might correct their mistakes without anger. Precision required calm teaching, not threats. An apprentice could spend several years mastering the art of reading faint chalk lines, listening to the tone of a stone under the hammer, or shaving a surface smooth without removing too much material. You might find yourself reflecting on how long a single project could last. Many medieval buildings were completed over the course of decades. Workers grew older during the process. Children born during the laying of the foundation might be old enough to carry tools by the time the upper levels reached completion. A few builders died before seeing the structure finished. Yet the continuity of the craft endured. New hands took up old tools. Fresh chisels replaced worn ones. The rhythm of progress remained steady, even when the people changed. As you look around this site in the middle of its creation, you also begin to sense how the surrounding town relied on the builders. Local markets sold food to the workers. Inns housed traveling craftsmen. Blacksmiths forged tools, nails, and replacement parts for cranes. Tanners provided leather for belts and tool straps. Children watched the site with fascination, learning to name each stage of the construction. Even farmers miles away profited when their grain or livestock found its way into the worksite meals. A building project was more than a structure in progress. It was an economic engine. It was also a form of shared identity for the town. People pointed to it as evidence of their community's ambition, stability, or faith. Yet not all aspects were harmonious. Wages often lagged behind expectations. Disputes broke out between craftsmen of different regions or guilds. Some workers left suddenly for a better offer in another town. Others fell ill from accidents, dust, or long exposure to the elements. When misfortune struck, The site absorbed the loss quietly. A new worker joined, and the work resumed. You see how medieval life accepted hardship as a steady companion rather than an interruption. You might also notice the slow but steady evolution of building knowledge. As projects grew larger and more ambitious, masons developed new techniques, stronger arches, improved buttressing, more reliable lifting devices, and more accurate measuring methods appeared gradually, often through small experiments. A failed attempt might remain visible for centuries in a slight shift of stones or an abandoned supporting arch. When you study medieval structures today, those imperfections still whisper the story of trial and error. Standing here, within the thick dust and quiet determination of this world, you feel a growing appreciation for the patience required to shape stone into something lasting. Nothing about this stage is dramatic. It is all repetition, discipline, and predictability. Yet these slow procedures built the foundations of entire cities. You may wonder now, as the middle of the story settles around you, how this long rhythm of incremental progress will eventually lead to the moment when the final stone is set in place. What does it feel like when a generation of effort finally stands complete before the workers who shaped it? You now return to the construction site in its later years, when the long labor of shaping, lifting, and aligning stone has begun to show its final purpose. The structure is no longer a suggestion of walls and scaffolds. It has grown into a shape that dominates the landscape, whether it is a town wall, a fortified gate, or the rising nave of a church. It now feels real, familiar, and permanent. But the closing phase of a medieval construction project is not the triumphant rush that modern imagination often envisions. Instead, it is slow, deliberate, and filled with the same ordinary details that marked its beginning. You start by observing how the site has changed. The sounds remain the same, but they are fewer. The heavy rhythm of stone hauling has eased, because most of the large blocks are already set. The treadwheel crane still operates, but not constantly. Instead, you hear more of the finer tools. Chisels shaping decorative elements, hammers tapping lightly, saws cutting narrow lengths of timber. Much of the work now lies in completion, adjustment, and refinement. A medieval building did not simply need to be strong. It needed to be correct according to local custom, guild standards, and the expectations of those funding the project. The workers who remain are the most experienced. Many temporary laborers have already moved on, and the apprentices who began at the start of the project now possess a reliable hand. You can even see how the years have changed their posture and their gait. Their movements are deliberate, shaped by seasons spent on scaffolds and long sessions at the banker benches. A few elder masons who once directed the early work now walk more slowly but still inspect the stone with careful eyes. Their presence acts as a reminder that a project of this length is a human chain. When the work ends, only the structure will remain. One of the last major tasks is the dressing of surfaces. Not all medieval stonework was smooth, but many sections required a careful finishing process. Masons used points, chisels, and mallets to even out irregularities, or to create a deliberate texture. This was not purely decoration. A uniform surface made the building more stable and better able to resist weathering. If you watch a mason at this stage, you notice a relaxed confidence. Each tool stroke follows a practiced rhythm. Dust settles in fine layers on clothing, hair, and eyebrows. Workers learn not to brush it away constantly. Instead, they wait until the end of the day. Dust was part of the craft, as natural as air. Decorative carving, when required, took place in workshops set slightly apart from the main construction area. Carvers worked seated on low stools, focusing intensely on small details. Leaves, animals, symbolic patterns and geometric shapes were common. Some designs were culturally significant, while others were simply aesthetic choices. You might assume these carvings were entirely planned, but many carvers added small variations of their own. These were rarely documented, yet they still survive on buildings centuries later, unnoticed by most visitors, but deeply familiar to those who created them. Another essential task during completion was the installation of wooden elements. Carpenters fitted doors, roof frames, window shutters, and internal supports. A roof frame, for example, required extraordinary skill. The angles needed to be exact, and the joints had to hold without modern fasteners. Carpenters relied on pegged joints, wedges, and carefully measured cuts. Watching them work, you gain an appreciation for how much geometry lived in their minds. They often could not write the calculations, yet they understood angles intuitively through repetition. Roofers followed, laying shingles of wood, slate, or tile. This work was among the most dangerous. Roofers moved across steep surfaces with baskets of materials strapped to their backs. They memorized the order of operations entirely. A single misplaced shingle could cause leaks for decades. You can imagine the silent concentration as these men crawled across the roof, shaping the final protective layer of the building. Inside the structure, plasterers and painters prepared walls. Medieval plaster was applied in several layers, smoothed by wooden trowels. The material dried slowly, sometimes taking weeks. Townspeople occasionally visited the site to observe the progress. Children speculated about what the final building would be used for, although adults had long known the purpose. This final phase gave the community a sense of anticipation. Even though they had lived beside the site for years, the idea of the finished structure still felt almost unreal. The master mason now spent more time reviewing than doing. He walked the full length of the site, inspecting joints, measuring angles, checking alignment, and ensuring that the work followed the original design. Medieval plans were not always drawn on parchment. Many were sketched on wooden boards, wax tablets, or even the ground. Some master masons kept the design entirely in memory, passing instructions verbally and adjusting the plan as they worked. The lack of formal blueprints did not indicate chaos. It demonstrated a combination of tradition and ingenuity, refined over generations. As the building neared completion, a sense of ceremony began to gather around the work. Communities often held small rituals to mark milestones such as the placing of the final stone or the lifting of the highest beam. A simple gathering might involve bread, ale, and quiet blessings. Workers enjoyed these moments because they acknowledged the years spent on the project. The celebration was never grand, but it was genuine. You can imagine the workers forming a semicircle around the final stone, watching as the master mason placed it with calm reverence. Once the structure stood complete, the site transformed rapidly. Tools were packed up. Scaffolding was dismantled. The ground, churned by years of labor, slowly cleared. Grass would eventually grow where work huts once stood. For the workers, the completion marked the end of a chapter. Some would stay in the town to maintain the structure or work on nearby buildings. Others would travel to new projects, carrying their knowledge with them. A few apprentices might remain permanently, establishing families and contributing to the town's future. When you walk inside the newly finished building, you notice something unexpected. The space feels calm, almost empty. The long process that created it has settled into silence. Every stone, every joint, every carved detail is now fixed in place. You can sense the weight of time layered into the walls. The building contains the memory of each worker who helped shape it, even though their names are lost. This was one of the quiet truths of medieval construction. The work was personal, but the legacy was collective. You may also reflect on how many future generations will walk these halls without ever knowing how many hands shaped the stones. A medieval structure was built for longevity, not fame. Its purpose lay in service. A church offered shelter, ritual, and community gathering. A fortified wall provided protection during uncertain years. A bridge connected distant fields. A gate controlled movement in and out of the town. These functions mattered far more than individual recognition. The building's value came from its usefulness and its endurance. In time, the structure would endure wars, weather, repairs, and perhaps even partial rebuilding. Some stones might be replaced centuries later, but the core would remain. Medieval builders never assumed their work was perfect. They simply hoped it would last long enough to serve its purpose. And in many cases, it did far more than that. It became part of the identity of the region, a landmark that outlived every person who labored on it. As you stand before the completed building, you may wonder how the medieval world shaped workers who knew that their lifetime of effort was only one chapter in a larger continuum. They built slowly, not because they lacked ambition, but because time itself was a resource they accepted rather than fought. Their legacy is not a dramatic tale but a quiet reminder of the strength of persistence. Now that the final stone has been set, and the scaffold shadows have disappeared into memory, you might find yourself asking a simple question. When so much of medieval life was uncertain, what gave these workers the confidence that their efforts, laid stone by stone, were truly worth the years they spent? You begin your next walk through medieval Europe in a place far less monumental than a stonework site, yet far more essential to daily life. The marketplace, especially at dawn, was the center of quiet survival for townspeople of every background. Here, the rhythm of life depended not on grand events or famous figures, but on the slow, consistent routines of trade, supply, and negotiation. In this first section, you step into that world, observing it as it comes alive in the earliest hours of the day. Before the sun rises, the town gate creaks open to admit traders who slept outside the walls in wagons or temporary shelters. Many medieval towns required visitors to stay outside the gates at night for security reasons. When the guard lifts the bar from the gate at dawn, you watch a small procession enter. They carry baskets, sacks, crates, and bundles wrapped in cloth. Some lead carts pulled by oxen, while others carry their goods on their backs. Their footsteps echo on the still quiet streets as they hurry toward the main square. They want to arrive early, long before customers appear, because setting up a stall takes time. The square itself lies mostly empty, except for a few permanent wooden booths lining the edges. In the center, temporary spaces marked by chalk lines or stones show where visiting merchants can arrange their goods. The town authorities regulate these placements, and a few early rising clerks are already present, holding small tablets or scraps of parchment to record who has arrived and what they are selling. They speak quietly, without urgency. This early hour is one of the few moments when officials, merchants, and laborers share the same calm atmosphere. You walk through the square as the first signs of morning appear. Lanterns flicker in fading light. The air carries smells of damp earth, cold metal, and the faint sweetness of whatever produce lies in the traders' baskets. A fishmonger lays out his wares on a wooden board, sprinkling salt over them to keep them fresh. A woman unloads large bundles of wool, spreading them carefully to keep them from dragging on the ground. A baker's apprentice arrives, with a cart of bread loaves wrapped in cloth. The loaves are still warm. He arranges them on a table with an efficiency you can tell he learned over many seasons. At this hour, there is little conversation. Most traders focus on arranging their stalls. They check ropes, inspect goods, and prepare scales. Medieval trade relied heavily on reputation, and a single morning's carelessness could damage trust that took years to build. A butcher sharpens his knives quietly, the scraping sound carrying softly through the square. A potter examines his ceramic bowls one by one for cracks that may have occurred during the journey. A woman selling herbs separates bundles with slow precision, removing any wilted leaves. She does not hurry. Neatness sells as much as the herbs themselves. As light spreads across the sky, the town begins to wake. Doors open along the streets leading to the square. Children carrying empty pails run to wells to fetch water. Craftsmen walk toward their workshops, pausing briefly to study what the traders are selling. Some passers-by greet the merchants, especially those who visit the town regularly. Medieval trade routes connected towns like beads on a string, and merchants often traveled in predictable cycles. Their return provided not only goods but news, stories, and occasional warnings about bandit activity or poor harvests in distant regions. Townswomen arrive soon after. Many households depend on the morning market to buy ingredients for the day's meals. There were no refrigerators and only limited storage, so food purchasing was a daily task. Women carry baskets on their arms or balance small clay pots against their hips. Some bring children with them, who watch the market with wide eyes. The presence of these families brings conversation back into the square. Voices rise in soft exchanges, not loud enough to disturb the traders, but adding life to the scene. You notice that buying and selling in the medieval world was far less hurried than in your own time. Negotiation was expected. Buyers carefully examined vegetables, counted eggs, and tested cloth texture between their fingertips. Prices were not fixed. They shifted depending on weather, supply, and relationships. A loyal customer who visited the same stall every morning might receive a slight discount not because she asked, but because the merchant valued her reliability. Trust mattered, both socially and economically. People remembered who paid fairly and who tried to cut prices too aggressively. Behind the marketplace, a row of small ovens and smokehouses emit faint warmth. Some towns regulated where cooking fires could be lit, so vendors selling hot food often shared common facilities. A man stirring a pot of porridge occasionally steps out to stretch his arms. Workers passing by might buy a warm bowl if they have a few coins. For the poorest laborers, this might be their only prepared meal of the day. A group of young apprentices carrying tool bags pass through the square on their way to work. They pause to buy a few apples from a fruit seller. The seller, an older man with a long beard, arranges the apples in neat rows even though he knows they will soon be handled repeatedly. His care reflects pride, not expectation of reward. Many merchants believed that presenting goods properly showed respect to both the buyer and the craft. You continue your slow walk, noticing the subtle tensions that shape the morning. A council inspector moves from stall to stall, checking measures and weights. Medieval authorities feared dishonest weights more than almost any other form of fraud, because short measures directly undermined trust in the market. Inspectors carried sets of standard weights sealed with the town's mark. They compared them to merchants' own weights, sometimes in full view of customers. If a discrepancy was discovered, punishment could follow swiftly. Confiscation, fines, or even public humiliation could result. Yet, most merchants maintained honest scales. Their livelihood depended on reputation more than profit margins. A pair of shepherds arrive late with bundles of fleeces. Their clothes smell of fields and sheep, and their boots are covered in dried mud. The wool attracts cloth makers and dyers, who examine the fleeces carefully. They rub fibers between thumb and finger, checking softness, length, and cleanliness. Negotiations unfold in quiet, steady voices. There is no rush. Both parties recognize that wool prices depend on the season, the health of the flock, and the dyeing needs of the upcoming months. What seems like a simple transaction to an observer is actually part of an interconnected network of local production. One of the most important parts of the marketplace is the presence of information itself. News flows freely here, carried by the merchants who travel the roads. A man selling pottery might share that the harvest in the northern fields was below average. A woman selling salted fish might mention that a distant coastal storm has disrupted supply. Such details help townspeople adjust their expectations, plant their fields differently, or prepare for shortages. The marketplace acts as an informal communication network long before official announcements reach the town. You may notice that despite the variety of goods, luxury items are rare. Most people spend their mornings purchasing essentials such as grain, vegetables, cloth, and simple tools. Expensive goods such as spices, fine pottery, or imported fabrics are handled with quiet caution. Some merchants keep these items wrapped in cloth until a trustworthy customer approaches. Theft was not common in the early hours, but caution was simply part of the environment. As the morning progresses, the marketplace becomes full. Voices blend into a steady hum, not loud but constant. The square feels peaceful in its own way. There is no music, no performance, and little spectacle. Instead, there is a stable, predictable pattern of activity. Every person here depends on someone else. The baker relies on the miller, who relies on the farmer. The weaver depends on the shepherd, who depends on the health of the fields. The market is the point where all these dependencies meet. This is not a dramatic scene, yet it holds the essence of medieval life more clearly than battles or coronations. Here, in the movement of everyday goods and the negotiation of fair prices, you can see how survival was sustained. People did not pursue excitement, they pursued steadiness. And this steadiness carried towns through difficult winters, unexpected shortages, and years of uncertainty. As the sun climbs higher, you observe something interesting. Despite the apparent simplicity of the scene, every detail has meaning. The quiet sharpening of a knife, the careful stacking of carrots, the repeated folding of a wool bundle, the deliberate act of weighing grain, and the measured pace of customers all contribute to the functioning of the community. Nothing is wasted, nothing is rushed, and nothing is accidental. Now, as the marketplace settles into its busy rhythm, you may find yourself wondering about the deeper stories hidden behind these stalls. Who are the people selling these goods? How do they survive the harshness of the seasons, the fluctuations in supply, and the uncertainties of town life? And how does this marketplace help hold the social fabric together, even when larger historical forces threaten stability? The town of Saint Remier had always believed its clock tower to be a gift from the heavens, an ordered thing in an uncertain world. Its tall stone frame rose above the clustered roofs, and its 4 wooden faces looked out toward every narrow lane and every market square, marking the hours with a steady toll that people trusted more than the cry of roosters or the position of the sun behind the fog. Yet, despite the tower's pride of place, few townsfolk ever wondered how such precision was maintained, or who spent his days and many of his nights coaxing the great machine within to keep breathing. For nearly 2 decades, that task had fallen to a single man, Master Guillaume de Simon, the official keeper of hours. He was known for his quiet nature, his thin frame, and his peculiar habit of listening to the gears as though they could speak back to him. And according to Guillaume, sometimes they did. He had not been born in Saint Remier. His family once lived in a village farther south, a place swallowed by a river flood when Guillaume was a boy. He and his father survived, though their house did not, and from that time he had learned to measure life not by chaos but by whatever could hold steady. His father, once a carpenter, began repairing tools and broken wheels for a living. Guillaume soon joined him, and discovered he could understand the language of mechanisms, the pull of tension, the whisper of friction, the tone of a gear that wanted oil, or the sigh of one that wished to move slower. The officials of Saint Remier hired him during a period of great frustration. Their beloved clock had been losing minutes each day, sometimes stopping altogether when damp mornings crept in. No one understood what ailed it. Guillaume arrived, studied the confused tangle of iron and brass, and within a week restored its rhythm. The mayor declared him a miracle worker, and Guillaume accepted the modest room they offered him beside the tower, knowing now he had found a calling that belonged to him as surely as the ticking belonged to time. Years passed in quiet consistency. Guillaume woke before dawn, recorded each hour gained or lost, fed the pigeons who perched on the rail outside his window, and returned to the clock room where its heartbeat greeted him warmly. He cleaned and adjusted each spindle, replaced worn teeth, and brushed away dust that settled like ash from ages long gone. And at night, when the tower groaned in its sleep, he would sit with a small lantern and listen to it settle, the way one listens to a creature learning to rest. Everything changed on an autumn morning, when Guillaume climbed the spiral stairs and noticed something different. A new sound, very faint, like a breath drawn through cloth. Not a skip, not a grind, more like a whisper. He stood still, holding the lantern high. The gears continued their smooth circle, but something beneath them spoke in a hushed scrape like parchment dragged over stone. Guillaume frowned. He leaned closer. There it was again. A voice that was not a voice. A murmur threaded through the metal. He checked the pendulum, then the escapement wheel, then every lever and spoke. Nothing was loose, and nothing was damaged. But the whisper pulsed faintly, almost rhythmic, rising ever so slightly when the long hand approached the next quarter mark. He felt the familiar, unsettling tingle along his arms. Machines in his life had always communicated through their condition, through the soft poetry of movement. But this was different. This was deliberate. He spent the next 3 days investigating. He charted the hours, compared temperatures, lifted floorboards, and inspected beams for pests or signs of rot. All appeared sound. Yet the whisper persisted, as if urging him toward some discovery not yet made. On the 4th day, he sought advice from Father Remiel, the elder priest of the nearby chapel. Remiel was a patient man, older than the tower itself, and he welcomed Guillaume with warm tea. When Guillaume confessed that something in the clock was speaking, the priest did not laugh. He stroked his beard and said, "Every creation carries memory. Sometimes the oldest ones try to remind us who built them, or why they were built. Perhaps your tower holds a story it wishes to tell." Guillaume left with more questions than comfort. That evening, long after the last bell had sounded, he lit a second lantern and descended to the lowest chamber of the clock. Few ever knew the tower had such a room. It lay beneath the main floor, supported by thick beams and crossbars, filled with tools and iron parts seldom used. Guillaume searched there, for he suspected the whisper came not from the machinery above, but from something below. He pressed his ear to the stone wall. The sound softened, but did not vanish. He touched the floor, feeling faint tremors, too gentle to be a true vibration. He noticed then a section of stone that seemed smoother than the rest, worn in a way that suggested frequent opening. He retrieved a crowbar. With steady, patient pressure, he pried at the edge. The stone shifted. Beneath it lay darkness and a narrow hollow. Inside, wrapped in old linen, was a wooden box bound with iron. Dust coated it in a thick layer, confirming it had rested untouched for many generations. Guillaume's breath caught as he pulled it into the lantern light. The whisper grew louder, not in volume but in presence, as though it surrounded him, urging him to proceed. He unlatched the box and lifted the lid. Inside lay a small brass device, unlike any gear or tool he had ever known. It resembled a miniature clock, yet without hands. Instead it had a circular disc etched with markings he could not translate, and in its center a single gem the color of deep wine. The device was quiet, but as he held it closer, Guillaume felt warmth pulse through the metal, like a heartbeat echoing faintly into his own fingers. Beneath the device sat a folded parchment sealed with wax. The seal bore an emblem he had never seen in Saint Remier, a sun encircled by a ring of stones. His hands trembled as he broke it open. The letter inside was written in a careful hand. It read, "To the future keeper of hours, know that this tower hides more than time. It guards the last relic of the circle of stone, whose craft once bound the movement of heavens to the order of men. Should the disk awaken, its bearer must decide whether the flow of hours remains natural or must be altered. Protect it, For as long as the tower stands, so does the balance it watches. Guillaume stared at the words until they blurred. A relic, a circle of stone, a device that could alter the movement of hours. He looked again at the brass disc. The gem at its center glowed faintly, a soft shimmer like a single breath of starlight. The whisper around him faded, replaced by the steady, measured ticking of the tower above. The discovery had silenced it, at least for now. Guillaume closed the lid and sat in the dim chamber. He felt the weight of centuries settle onto his shoulders. He had always believed himself merely a caretaker of gears and pendulums, a listener to metal. Now he understood his responsibility, reached far beyond punctual bells. The tower had trusted him. Not because he was clever with tools, but because he listened. He climbed the stairs, carrying the box close to his chest. When he reached the clock room, he set it upon his workbench. The gem shimmered again, casting a faint glow across the gears. Guillaume whispered into the stillness, "I hear you." And for the first time in all his years tending the tower, he felt it answer without making a sound. The night bells rang, and Saint Remir slept. But above the rooftops, the clock tower kept its vigil, and the Keeper of Hours began to unravel a mystery forgotten by everyone except the stones themselves. When you reach the final layer of a medieval town's daily structure, you begin to see how much of life operated on an unspoken agreement. You could follow a merchant through his entire day, or watch a group of apprentices quarrel over the correct way to sharpen a tool, or sit quietly at a tavern corner, while a local alderman muttered about tax disputes, and still never hear anyone speak openly about the true systems that govern them. They were not written laws, nor proclamations displayed at the gates. They were older, quieter rules, born from habit, tradition, and the pressure of living so close together inside stone walls that echoed every sound. You might picture yourself walking the same narrow lanes as before, though now with a deeper sense of how the town breathes. The morning begins not with a bell, but with the simple rhythm of shutters opening, one after another, like a row of uneven dominoes. No one needs to announce the hour. Those living here rely more on custom than clocks. If you greeted someone by saying, perhaps a bit too brightly, that it was a fine morning at a specific hour, they might look at you with a faint trace of amusement, as if you were from a place where precision mattered more than the natural cadence of the day. One of the customs you would quickly notice is the town's unwritten rule of noise. It is a place full of movement, yet somehow quieter than you expect. People speak softly, unless they are at the market. Doors are pushed closed rather than slammed. At sunset, the entire tone of the town shifts, as if the streets themselves have agreed to behave. The reason is practical, rather than polite. When you live only an arm's length from your neighbors, noise becomes its own kind of intrusion, nearly as offensive as stepping onto someone's plot of land. So people learned early to tread lightly. Another custom involves the careful arrangement of space in the streets. If the market lane widens even slightly, you will see sellers organizing themselves in a pattern they never discuss but always follow. The most experienced traders take the central positions where foot traffic flows strongest. Newer sellers line the borders. Those with specialties such as metal goods keep a respectful distance from those whose wares might spark or damage. Bakers try to station themselves far enough from fishmongers to avoid unpleasant scents mixing. None of these patterns are written. You learn them by watching, or by being corrected in a soft voice by someone older who has been in that spot for decades. Inside the town walls, seniority is a currency of its own. Doors with deeper grooves in their thresholds belong to families who have lived there long enough for generations of footsteps to wear the wood into a softened dip. You would be expected to show deference to those families, even if you could not name any of their ancestors. They carry a weight that newcomers, no matter their wealth, cannot match. And if you stayed long enough, you would see how that weight guided conversations, how it shaped decisions in the guild hall, and even how it affected who stood closest to the fire during winter gatherings. In such a place, life is governed by practical needs, shaped into quiet rituals. A barrel left outside a cooper's shop is not just a container, but a signal that the family is awake and ready to take orders. If the barrel is placed slightly farther into the street, it means they have taken on too much work and will decline new requests. And if the barrel is absent entirely, neighbors know the cooper is tending to repairs elsewhere. Each profession has its own signals, all subtle, all understood without explanation. You might imagine trying to learn these meanings quickly, hoping to avoid a misstep that would reveal your unfamiliarity. Perhaps you pause at a public well, where a small line has formed. The people wait in silence, each carrying a bucket or earthen jug. They do not exchange greetings unless they know each other well. They simply wait. This patience is not out of politeness but necessity. Wells are among the most contested spaces in the town. Disputes can arise here more easily than in the market, because the resource is finite. So everyone behaves carefully, avoiding conversations that might escalate. There is nothing more dangerous in a crowded town than a quarrel at a water source. You may observe a similar restraint at the communal bake oven. Not every household maintains its own oven, for such structures are costly and prone to fire. So families bring dough to a shared oven, run by an oven keeper. Here you would see another silent custom. Families mark their loaves with small cuts or patterns to distinguish them after baking. No one would ever take another household's bread, not because they fear punishment, but because the act would violate an unspoken pact required for shared survival. The town depends on cooperation, even if no one mentions it aloud. As you continue your walk, you begin to notice how outsiders are identified. New arrivals are watched carefully but not necessarily suspiciously. People simply need to understand where someone fits in the existing order. Outsiders behave differently. They walk too quickly, or ask too many questions, or fail to move aside for someone of higher standing. Such habits mark them instantly. A long-established resident might approach them, offering help that is both kind and instructive. They might explain how to approach the guild hall, or where to find lodging. But beneath the politeness lies a subtle assessment, one that every town resident instinctively performs. Does this newcomer understand how to live inside walls shared by so many? Consider, also, the custom of lending tools. In some places, neighbors lend freely, knowing that shared resources prevent unnecessary strain on the community. But others guard their tools closely, especially metal ones. Sharpened blades, woodworking implements, and metal spikes are expensive. Asking to borrow one of these items is not a small request. If you were to ask without first offering help or goodwill, you might find the neighbor politely refusing, claiming the tool is needed for ongoing work. The refusal would not be personal. It would simply reflect the town's deeply ingrained understanding of scarcity. Inside many households, you would observe routines that appear ordinary, yet reveal the rhythms of medieval life. Floors are swept not once but several times in a day, because dirt enters constantly from the streets. Clothing is hung near a window for airing since laundering is laborious and uses water that must be carried by hand. Meals are planned with care, stretching ingredients to last through the week. If a stew is prepared on a market day, it is reheated and expanded over several meals, perhaps with barley or lentils added on subsequent days. This slow stretching of food is not an act of poverty, but of prudence, a practice passed down through generations. Children, too, follow customs that adults rarely think to explain. They know where they may play and where they may not. They know which alleys belong to groups of older youths who might tease or chase them. They know how far they can wander without alarming their parents. And they learn quickly to respect the boundaries of workshops, especially those dealing with hot materials such as metal or dyes. No written signs warn them away. The rules are held in memory and transmitted through whispered advice between siblings and friends. The town's evenings bring another layer of silent organization. You may hear the hum of conversation drifting from windows, the faint rattle of pots, or the low shuffle of someone sweeping their doorstep. Candles flicker behind shutters. A few figures move with purpose, carrying buckets or tools, completing tasks before night fully settles. All of this occurs with an air of quiet routine. No one rushes. The day winds down with the same structure that carried it forward. And if you look closely, you might see how neighbors tend to synchronize their actions. As one family shutters its windows, others follow. As one household prepares its evening fire, the smell encourages another to do the same. It is a collective rhythm, unspoken but deeply felt. Now, imagine the town at night. The streets empty, save for the watchman who moves slowly with a lantern. You might think the town is still, but within the houses life continues. Families mend clothing, share stories, or prepare items for the next day's work. The fire is carefully banked to last through the night. The town is not asleep yet, but it is enclosed in a kind of hush that reflects the closeness of its people. There is no need for loud speech or bright lights. The night is a time of conservation, a time for reflection, and a time for listening to the soft echoes of footsteps that occasionally pass outside. In this final view of medieval town life, you come to understand that survival here depends as much on cooperation as on skill. The customs that guide everything from market arrangements to shared ovens exist because without them the town would quickly fall into disorder. And because these customs are rarely spoken aloud, they become almost invisible to those who follow them every day. But to you, observing with fresh eyes, they reveal the quiet structure that supports the community. Still, even with all this knowledge, one question remains. If so much of life in the town depends on unwritten customs, what happens when a new generation rises and begins to reshape them according to its own needs and beliefs? You step now into a world shadowed, not by stone walls or market stalls, but by sickness and the uncertainty of life itself. The mid-14th century brought what later generations would call the Black Death, though the people living through it understood neither its cause nor its reach. In this section you follow the slow, deliberate steps of daily life under a cloud of fear, observing how ordinary people tried to preserve normality, survive, and maintain community amid invisible and unpredictable threats. At first, the signs are subtle. In a small village near a bend in the river, you notice a few households with fewer visitors at the well. Merchants who once called out prices in the market are now quieter, wary of lingering too long. Families who depend on seasonal trading hesitate to travel, fearing encounters with strangers from other regions. Though no one yet speaks the word plague aloud, the tension is palpable. You sense that everyone is adjusting habits in ways that seem almost instinctive, avoiding unnecessary contact, preparing more food at home, washing hands and utensils more thoroughly, though their understanding of contagion is limited to folk theory and observation rather than germ science. In the streets of a larger town, you see that the medical practitioners have already begun their work, though their methods seem slow, cumbersome, and sometimes more ceremonial than curative. Barbers double as surgeons, and their knowledge comes largely from copying older manuals. Physicians measure pulses, study urine for discolorations, and prescribe remedies based on elements such as blood and bile, or the phases of the moon. A common treatment might include bloodletting, the application of poultices made from herbs, or inhaling vapors from burning resins. Some people cling desperately to these practices, while others resort to charms, amulets, and prayer. Every household has a slightly different approach, often combining practical cleaning, home remedies, and superstition in a carefully balanced routine. You follow a healer moving through the narrow lanes, carrying a basket of herbs, small vials of tinctures, and a well-worn leather-bound book of notes. He stops at a house where a child has fallen ill with fever. The mother has prepared a small bowl of broth and laid a damp cloth across the child's forehead. The healer inspects the child silently, murmuring to himself as he touches the pulse, examines the eyes, and listens to breathing. He does not rush. His movements are slow and methodical, because mistakes can be fatal and panic spreads faster than disease. Outside, the larger town operates on cautious routines. Markets continue though with noticeable changes. Merchants spread their stalls farther apart, and buyers observe distance, not because a rule demands it, but because the rhythm of caution has embedded itself in the collective memory. People avoid touching coins directly when possible, often exchanging them on scraps of cloth or wood. Trades that were once lively and noisy now proceed in low tones. Children, previously running freely between stalls, now linger at the edge of their parents' skirts. The town has adapted slowly to uncertainty, preserving as much ordinary rhythm as possible even as an invisible threat lingers. One of the most striking elements of life during this time is the reliance on communal labor. Fields still need tending, livestock still need care, and timber must be prepared for the long winter. Entire families develop careful schedules to balance survival with avoidance of unnecessary exposure. You notice the quiet determination in their routines. Men and women rise before sunrise to tend crops. Children carry water or firewood, and everyone maintains a rhythm of work, meals, and rest that becomes almost sacred. Despite fear, the ordinary work continues, providing both sustenance and a sense of purpose. In some households, neighbors are invited to share meals or assist with chores when a family member falls ill. You might witness a baker leaving extra bread outside a door for a quarantined neighbor, or a blacksmith delivering firewood in silence. These acts of practical kindness are embedded in daily custom. They do not require fanfare, only recognition of mutual dependence. In a world where sickness can arrive unpredictably, this quiet cooperation ensures the survival of the community itself. The church, too, plays a subtle role in shaping the town's survival strategies. Clerics maintain records of births, deaths, and marriages, which offer a sense of continuity amid chaos. Rituals proceed with careful adaptation. Mass may be abbreviated, prayers are whispered, and holy water is sprinkled more sparingly. Clerics advise households on spiritual well-being, often blending practical guidance, cleaning, separating the sick, or avoiding certain gatherings with counsel for moral behavior. Religion, in these circumstances, functions as both comfort and structure. Yet even with these routines, uncertainty dominates. Some families discover that despite careful measures, illness strikes, entire households can disappear in a matter of days. Streets that seemed orderly the day before are suddenly emptied, homes shuttered, smoke rising from funeral pyres in the distance. At these moments, the town shifts its attention from daily survival to containment. Special graveyards are dug quickly, bodies are wrapped in linen and buried with minimal ceremony, and the survivors continue their routines with an added layer of vigilance. You see a quiet resilience, a willingness to endure the unimaginable by relying on familiar patterns. Amid all this, children adapt in remarkable ways. They observe their parents' caution, participate in small protective rituals, and learn to recognize signs of illness. Play changes, games are shorter, simpler, and more structured. Lessons are learned from necessity: how to carry water safely, how to avoid contaminated areas, how to assist the sick without endangering oneself. These early lessons, quiet and unspoken, shape the next generation's understanding of both survival and community responsibility. Even in wealthier households, the patterns of precaution are evident. A merchant family might continue trading, but their servants follow strict protocols. Food is prepared with extra care, garments are washed daily, windows are opened to allow airflow, courtyards are cleaned meticulously, not for appearance but to limit the accumulation of debris that could harbor illness. Every routine, no matter how mundane, acquires a subtle significance, a silent understanding that survival relies as much on repetition as on luck. By the afternoon, the town resembles a carefully balanced ecosystem. Markets, workshops, homes, and public spaces operate in interdependent ways. People move deliberately, avoiding unnecessary contact, and adjusting behaviors according to observed threats. Knowledge of illness spreads quietly: which routes are safer, which households are cautious, which herbs seem most effective. There is no frantic panic, only measured attention to small observable details. As dusk approaches, you observe one of the more poignant customs signaling the health of a household. Windows remain shuttered if illness is present. Lamps may burn longer, signaling activity within. Neighbors respond accordingly, offering assistance only if needed and respecting boundaries otherwise. This delicate dance maintains both community cohesion and individual safety. You might marvel at the unspoken agreements that allow a town to function amid invisible danger, long before modern science could explain contagion or infection. And yet, despite all these routines and careful practices, the human heart persists in hope. Children laugh quietly in alleys when they can. Women exchange recipes and herbal remedies. Merchants trade goods and news. Clerics continue to bless homes. The town does not stop living. Every measured act, every cautious habit, every small kindness contributes to the endurance of the community itself. As you leave the streets for a moment, you might reflect on the extraordinary nature of this ordinary persistence. The plague has brought fear, grief, and disruption, but it has also revealed patterns of resilience and adaptation that are invisible in grand histories. The survival of medieval towns relied not only on skill or faith, but on quiet observation, slow adjustment, and a willingness to act with care, even when the outcome was uncertain. And now, as evening shadows stretch across the rooftops, you may wonder how many of these small routines, learned under the pressure of fear and death, shaped the way communities would rebuild afterward. How many lessons survived because they were repeated in silence, passed from neighbor to neighbor, child to child, long before historians recorded them. In this quiet endurance, the story of the town continues, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. The day after the town awakens to uncertainty, you move deeper into the streets, into alleys and courtyards, where ordinary people practice extraordinary resilience. You follow not the wealthy or the officials, but the household healers, herbalists, and pragmatic townsfolk whose labor keeps families alive when knowledge is limited and danger invisible. In this section, you witness the slow evolution of medicine, survival strategies, and communal care during a time of epidemic, observing details that historians rarely highlight because they appear mundane, yet they were the lifeblood of the town. You begin at a small courtyard, behind a modest home, where an elderly woman, known only as Tante Mathilde, prepares herbal remedies each morning. She has lived here for decades and learned the rhythms of illness through observation rather than formal training. A thick bundle of dried herbs hangs from a beam overhead, each tied carefully with string and labeled in a handwriting you might describe as precise yet uneven. Chamomile, sage, rosemary, and yarrow are carefully separated. When pulled together for a remedy, Their combination reflects decades of trial and quiet experimentation. Mathilde does not speak loudly. Her work is deliberate, almost ritualistic. Each action is measured, as if the process itself has power. Her apprentice, a girl of 12 named Eleanor, helps with smaller tasks. She pounds leaves into powder, straining them with a simple cloth, and sorts seeds for infusions. She learns by watching how to crush gently, so as not to release too much bitterness, how to pour water without spilling precious tinctures, how to boil roots long enough to extract their essence, but not so long that the liquid becomes unpalatable. The learning is slow, repetitive, and meticulous, but essential. You notice that in this small courtyard, the apprenticeship is as much about patience as about knowledge. From Mathilde's window, you can see the town beyond. Streets carry the echo of daily routines. A blacksmith strikes iron rhythmically in his workshop. Children carry water, and merchants walk carefully between stalls, exchanging goods while keeping a cautious distance. But in these streets, subtle variations mark households that have already been touched by sickness. A faded cloth draped across a door signals quarantine. A pile of ash near a chimney shows recent fumigation. People whisper among themselves about which herbs are effective, which household is recovering, and which is in danger. Knowledge spreads slowly, relying on observation, repetition, and trust rather than written manuals. You might notice the significance of smells. Smoke from herbal fires, pungent and acrid, often lingers in the air. People believed that certain scents could repel disease, though they did not understand microbes. Lavender, juniper, and rosemary were common. Smokehouses sometimes doubled as cleansing spaces for people and animals alike. Even the smallest household learned to manage odors as a protective measure. In this context, scent becomes a practical signal. The presence of smoke suggests vigilance, while its absence may indicate either negligence or a household unaware of a brewing illness. In the town's market square, you observe a similar quiet adaptation. Vendors space themselves strategically, arranging stalls to limit close contact while maintaining accessibility. Buyers inspect goods carefully. Vegetables are checked for rot, eggs for cracks, and herbs for freshness. But beyond inspection, you notice subtle behaviors. Coins are placed on scraps of wood, hands are washed in between transactions, and goods are often carried in cloth sacks to reduce handling. These small adjustments, learned quickly, reflect an intuitive understanding of risk long before germ theory existed. One household displays another layer of survival, a system of care within the family. When a member falls ill, others adjust their roles quietly. Children may be sent to collect water or help with meals, while adults limit direct contact, focusing on cooking, cleaning, or other tasks that reduce exposure. You see an older sibling carefully moving straw bedding and washing linen, while a mother prepares simple soups for the sick. Each task, seemingly ordinary, becomes a lifeline. It is a choreography of survival, shaped by necessity, repeated across hundreds of homes in the town. The healers also adapt, innovating from the simplest observations. A mixture of honey and garlic, once considered a common seasoning, becomes a poultice for wounds or fever. Wine is used as both antiseptic and nutrient. Catnip, marjoram, and rue find their way into infusions that soothe the ill. These remedies are not miraculous, but they are methodical, relying on consistency and careful measurement. Observing the repetition, you realize that success is less about the potency of a single herb than about maintaining daily care routines, monitoring changes, and responding promptly to worsening symptoms. In some households, you might see more creative measures: the isolation of the sick in a corner of the home, bedding layered with straw or rushes, and windows partially open to allow airflow. People develop schedules for cleaning, feeding, and observing the ill, often recording symptoms mentally or in simple tally marks on scraps of parchment. You notice that observation is at the heart of survival. Families act on what they can see: the appearance of a rash, the pattern of a cough, the heat of a body. Decisions are slow and deliberate, aimed at minimizing harm while preserving daily life. Even the town's cemeteries reflect careful management. Graves are dug methodically, often at a safe distance from homes. Burial rituals are adapted to limit contact. Tellurics perform prayers from the edge of the site. Stone markers may be hastily inscribed or omitted entirely to reduce handling. And yet, through all of this, the town preserves a sense of order. You see a pattern emerge. Life continues in measured steps, balancing the need to care, to survive, and to honor those who fall. This balance is neither obvious nor easy, yet it sustains the community in ways that later history often overlooks. By evening, the town settles into a routine that has become second nature. Healers review their supplies, Families prepare meals, children quietly complete chores, and markets close for the day. Even as fear of the plague persists, life continues. You notice the extraordinary patience and repetition that allows this fragile equilibrium to exist. It is not spectacular, it is slow, almost invisible. Yet without it, the town could not endure. And as you stand in the quiet twilight, reflecting on the subtle rhythms of care and adaptation, you might ask yourself, how did these quiet patterns of survival, observed and repeated across generations, influence the ways in which future towns and cities approached health, illness, and community responsibility? How many lessons of slow, methodical care survived, because they were transmitted quietly, from neighbor to neighbor, long before formal medicine could codify them? As the plague's shadow slowly passes over towns like Saint Remir, you enter a world transformed. The streets, once subdued by fear and careful routines, begin to hum with renewed activity. Yet nothing returns to exactly what it was. You see how survival has reshaped daily life, created new social patterns, and demanded innovations that, though small, quietly influence generations to come. In this section you observe how recovery unfolds, not as a sudden event, but as a deliberate, patient process that stretches over months, and sometimes years. The first signs of change appear in the marketplace. Merchants who had reduced their presence during outbreaks return in cautious increments, testing the willingness of townspeople to re-engage with commerce. You notice subtle rituals. Sellers shake hands sparingly, offering nods or curt bows instead. Goods are displayed carefully, with an eye to sanitation, whether through cloth coverings or the separation of perishable items. People navigate the space with a new awareness, maintaining habits learned during the plague, scrubbing hands after transactions, using trays or boards for exchanges, keeping distance where possible. This persistence of careful behavior illustrates that even after the immediate threat diminishes, the lessons of survival linger. Households adjust similarly. Families who lost members reorganize their domestic routines to compensate for missing hands or knowledge. You might observe a young apprentice stepping into roles previously held by elders, learning tasks rapidly under pressure. Cooking, laundry, water carrying, and childcare are coordinated with careful attention, often using signals and patterns that predate the crisis. Doors and windows that had been sealed for quarantine are opened once more, but air circulation, hygiene, and observation remain priorities. The memory of vulnerability endures in these small acts of care. One of the more remarkable adaptations is the system of mutual aid that grows from experience. Neighbors who had once simply tolerated each other now exchange resources more systematically. You may see families sharing grain or firewood, organizing rotations for tending gardens, or jointly maintaining wells and ovens. Social cohesion becomes as much a tool of survival as any herb or home remedy. Those who had observed and recorded the subtle signs of illness during the crisis now serve as informal advisors, guiding others through recovery and helping prevent future outbreaks. Their knowledge is practical, transmitted through repeated demonstration rather than formal instruction. Children and apprentices, who had been observers during the crisis, emerge as participants in maintaining community stability. You might notice them delivering water, tending small gardens, or helping with animal care, tasks they undertook cautiously during the plague, but now perform with growing confidence. The repetition of survival strategies instills a sense of responsibility and competence, preparing a generation to manage the ordinary dangers of life in a medieval town. These lessons, quietly absorbed, will influence social behavior long after the immediate threat has faded. In the workshops and guilds, production resumes with subtle changes. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and bakers retain habits of careful spacing, sanitation, and cautious interaction. Workspaces are reorganized for efficiency, and apprentices are trained not only in craft, but in health-conscious practices. Merchants keep written or mental records of which routes and regions proved safest during outbreaks, integrating that knowledge into business planning. You notice that the plague has shifted priorities slightly. Speed and quantity remain important, but care and observation gain equal weight. The town functions now as a hybrid of old routine and adaptive innovation. Even religious life adapts. Clerics, who had previously performed rites at a distance or with abbreviated ceremonies, resume more conventional practices but retain caution. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals are conducted with deliberate spacing and attention to cleanliness. The church records, already meticulous, now carry additional notes about households' experiences during the plague, creating a living memory of survival for future generations. In these ways, Spiritual, social, and practical considerations intertwine to maintain both community cohesion and individual well-being. The streets themselves begin to show signs of life that are both practical and symbolic. Children play more openly, though with a sense of measured caution. Merchants greet returning customers with a quiet warmth. Taverns reopen, with careful preparation of food and drink, and families begin to resume modest social gatherings. You notice that laughter, once a rare sound during the epidemic, gradually returns, not in excess, but with a quiet acknowledgement of endurance and continuity. Recovery, however, is uneven. Some households remain cautious for months, hesitant to resume full routines. Others, having experienced minimal impact, resume activity with remarkable speed. The town evolves into a mosaic of responses, each household balancing past fear with present need. Observation remains crucial. Families watch neighbors for signs of renewed illness. They monitor supplies, and they continue subtle practices of hygiene and precaution. These behaviors are deeply ingrained, and they illustrate a profound lesson. Survival is not about eliminating risk entirely, but about managing it through careful observation and repeated, consistent practice. As you move toward evening, you may notice that the very architecture of the town reflects this period of adaptation. Windows that had been shuttered for long months are reinforced with wooden frames to improve airflow and insulation. Public spaces, such as wells, ovens, and meeting areas, are reorganized to accommodate safer communal use. Streets remain clean, swept with care, and alleys are cleared of debris more consistently. Every small action contributes to the ongoing resilience of the town, preserving both health and community order. By the time darkness falls, the town has regained much of its daily rhythm, yet the experience of the plague leaves an enduring imprint. Habits learned in fear, the careful spacing, the hygiene practices, the observation of symptoms, persist quietly alongside pre-existing customs. The townspeople move through life with a dual consciousness, one eye on the ordinary tasks of survival, the other on the lessons of the past, ever vigilant for early signs of disruption. You leave the streets with a sense of admiration for the human capacity to endure, adapt, and rebuild. The plague, though devastating, revealed the resilience embedded in ordinary routines, the quiet ingenuity of household care, and the importance of communal trust. It shows that survival is rarely the result of a single hero or dramatic event. Instead, it is the accumulation of small, consistent actions repeated day after day, year after year, until life resumes its course, subtly reshaped but remarkably persistent. And as you reflect on these quiet acts of endurance, one question lingers: how many of the survival strategies and routines forged under the shadow of the plague became the foundation for modern approaches to public health, hygiene, and community care, even centuries before science could explain the unseen forces that shaped them? You now step quietly into the cloistered world of a medieval monastery, a place removed from bustling town markets, yet intricately connected to the rhythms of daily life. The monastery is not merely a spiritual retreat, it is a hub of work, learning, and survival. Within its walls, gardens, kitchens, and workshops function in harmony, creating a self-sufficient ecosystem that sustains monks and indirectly the surrounding community. In this section, you follow the ordinary yet meticulously structured activities of monastic life, observing how labor, observation, and quiet discipline shape the course of survival and knowledge over decades. The cloister is arranged with careful precision. Stone walkways frame rectangular garden beds, each planted with herbs, vegetables, and flowers chosen for both their practical and symbolic significance. Chamomile and sage line the edges, lavender grows near the well, and lettuces, cabbages, and onions fill the central plots. Roses and lilies, though not edible, are tended alongside these practical plants, for they provide visual rhythm and seasonal markers, signaling the passage of time to those who walk daily among the rows. The monks themselves walk slowly through the gardens in the early morning, hands lightly brushing leaves as they inspect for pests, rot, or signs of illness in the soil. This quiet vigilance is a form of survival. A single crop failure could disrupt not only their diet but also their medicinal preparations. Among the gardeners, Brother Anselm is particularly methodical. He measures the width between rows with a carved wooden rod, noting how sun and shade shift across the plots throughout the day. He records these subtle changes in a notebook, using symbols and shorthand that only he fully understands. Each entry is carefully dated, sometimes with commentary on how a frost affected young seedlings, or how an unusual insect infestation might impact harvests later in the season. Though the work appears mundane, the precision and patience reveal a disciplined mind observing the cycles of nature over time. The monastery's kitchen relies on the gardens to provide sustenance, especially during winter when stores must last months. Fresh vegetables are harvested, roots dug carefully from the soil, and herbs gathered at precise times to preserve potency. Cooking is slow and deliberate. Vegetables are boiled or roasted, grains are prepared in simple stews, and every ingredient is stretched to provide nourishment for as many meals as possible. The monks eat quietly, mindful of the quantity of food remaining, yet they do not rush. Mealtimes are as much about observing the balance of provision as they are about consumption. Medical preparation is another critical function of these gardens. Herbs are harvested for poultices, salves, and infusions. Some, like rosemary, serve as antiseptics. Others, such as yarrow, are used to staunch bleeding or reduce fever. Brother Anselm and a small team of monks prepare these remedies with meticulous attention. Leaves are dried over low heat, roots powdered with wooden mortars, and tinctures steeped in wine or vinegar. They label each vessel, noting not only the ingredients but also the date of preparation and intended use. The work is repetitive and often dull to outsiders, but within it lies the knowledge that sustains health for the cloister and nearby villages. Daily life in the monastery is also structured by time, marked by the ringing of bells rather than the sun alone. Vigils, prayers, meals, and work are all punctuated by sound, creating a rhythm that organizes labor and reflection. The bells are measured and regular, not just spiritually meaningful, but practically useful. They signal transitions in activity and allow monks to coordinate work across multiple areas, from gardening to manuscript copying. You observe how these routines create predictability, a way to manage both the physical and mental demands of life in a confined, self-sufficient environment. Beyond the cloister walls, the monastery interacts with the surrounding world. Villagers come to trade, seek remedies, or request advice. The monks prepare small parcels of herbs, bread, or cheese, which are delivered to households or travelers. They maintain careful records of who receives what, noting the effectiveness of each remedy or the outcome of a particular intervention. These transactions are quiet, uncelebrated, yet they knit the monastery into the broader fabric of regional survival and care. Even labor is a lesson in observation and endurance. The monks rotate tasks methodically. One group tills the soil, another harvests, while others maintain paths, walls, and roofs. Every action is repeated daily, not for ceremony alone, but for necessity. Tools are cared for with patience. Hoes are sharpened, spades oiled, and carts repaired. The repetition of this labor, though monotonous, preserves not only the physical structures, but the knowledge of maintaining them, ensuring the monastery's sustainability over decades. As the sun sets, you notice the quiet discipline in daily chores. Water is carried from the well in measured quantities. Fires are banked in preparation for night. Herbs are stored in stone chambers to maintain temperature and humidity. Meals are simple, yet every detail, from portioning bread to arranging vegetables, is precise, reflecting awareness of scarcity and survival. Even the smallest act, such as mending a torn garment, carries weight in preserving the overall functioning of the cloister. The monk's vigilance is not merely about survival in the short term, but about legacy. Records of planting, harvesting, and remedies are preserved in notebooks and manuscripts. Knowledge of herbs, cultivation, and treatment is transmitted carefully from one brother to another. Each year, observations are compared to previous seasons, creating a layered understanding of how the environment interacts with health, nutrition, and labor. These mundane notes, often overlooked by outsiders, form a repository of wisdom that ensures the monastery's longevity. Yet despite this structured life, uncertainty remains. Weather may fail a harvest, disease may strike among the brothers, or external pressures, taxation, conflict, or famine, may disrupt routines. The monk's calm adherence to method and observation is both practical and psychological. Repetition and structure provide stability amid factors beyond human control. This quiet endurance demonstrates that survival is rarely dramatic. It is often repetitive, slow, and exacting, requiring patience and attention over years rather than heroic gestures over hours. As night falls, the cloister settles into silence. The gardens rest, the kitchen cools, and the monks retire, prepared for the next day's cycle. You reflect on the subtle interplay between labor, observation, and survival. Ordinary routines, the pruning of a rose bush, the stirring of a herb infusion, the sweeping of stone floors, are the hidden threads that sustain life, health, and knowledge. They are the unnoticed forces that allow the monastery to endure, shaping not only the present but the generations to come. And as you leave the quiet cloister, one thought remains. In a world governed by repetition, observation, and careful labor, how much of what we now consider extraordinary knowledge, the effective use of herbs, the management of crops, or the preservation of community, was born from the persistence of daily, often boring, tasks that people performed not for fame or recognition, but simply to survive. As the morning sun touches the stone walls of the cloister, you enter the deeper routines of monastic life, moving beyond gardening and sustenance into the realm of medicine and practical care. The monastery, though quiet and seemingly removed from the outside world, functions as both sanctuary and laboratory, where observation, repetition, and careful labor intersect to sustain health and life. In this section, you follow the monks as they transform herbs into remedies, record patterns of illness, and maintain the delicate balance of survival in an era when knowledge of disease is fragmented and incomplete. Brother Anselm, who carefully tends the garden plots, now enters the apothecary chamber, a small room lined with wooden shelves stacked with jars, dried herbs, and bundles of roots. Each container bears inscriptions detailing the plant, its harvest date, preparation method, and intended use. You watch him methodically select chamomile, yarrow, and sage, grinding and sifting each leaf into a fine powder. The air is heavy with the scent of dried plants, a mixture that is both medicinal and strangely comforting, signaling safety and attention. Each step is deliberate, measured against centuries of observed tradition, though none of the formulas are guaranteed to cure. Eleanor, the young apprentice, assists by measuring the herbs, stirring infusions, and maintaining logs of quantities used. She learns by observation and gentle correction, noting that even small differences in preparation, how long a leaf is steeped, how finely it is ground, or the exact temperature of water, can affect both potency and palatability. In a world where sickness can strike quickly, these subtle details are the difference between an effective treatment and wasted effort. Every minute of care is a lesson in precision and patience, emphasizing the importance of repetition over theory. Outside the chamber, the cloister hums with quiet, purposeful activity. Monks carry food, tend animals, and sweep the stone floors, maintaining the environment in which health can be preserved. Cleanliness, though understood differently than modern sanitation, is treated as essential. Bedding is aired, kitchens are scrubbed, and floors are swept multiple times a day. The observation of small signs, spilled water, mold on bread, unusual discoloration of herbs, becomes a silent discipline, a way to prevent illness before it arises. In the infirmary, Brother Gerard tends to those who fall ill, whether a visiting villager or a member of the monastery. Beds are arranged with care, each separated by as much distance as the space allows. Linen is changed daily, and straw is replaced to maintain dryness and reduce pests. Gerard examines his patients carefully, their pulse, color, appetite, and energy. He records these observations in a simple ledger, noting even minor changes. These seemingly dull entries are crucial. They allow the monastery to detect patterns of illness, adjust treatments, and track the progression of ailments over time. Remedies are crafted slowly and deliberately. A poultice of honey, garlic, and crushed herbs is applied to wounds. A mild infusion of chamomile and lemon balm is given to calm fever or stomach discomfort. Each preparation is repeated carefully day after day to maintain consistency. You observe that the effectiveness of treatment often depends less on any single ingredient and more on the disciplined execution of care, combined with the constant monitoring of the patient's condition. Survival in this context is an accumulation of small, repeated acts rather than miraculous cures. Interactions with villagers illustrate another aspect of monastic medicine. Those who visit seeking remedies or advice are treated with patience and careful instruction. A mother may bring a sick child, and the monks will demonstrate how to prepare infusions, how to apply compresses, and how to observe symptoms. Instructions are given slowly, in small steps, allowing knowledge to pass from the cloister to the wider community. Even the simplest lessons, boiling water before use, keeping wounds clean, rotating bedding, carry profound implications for survival. The monastery functions as a quiet center for education as much as for care. Daily life also emphasizes the prevention of illness. Monks carefully manage diet, balancing vegetables, grains, and limited protein. Herbs are incorporated into meals not only for flavor but for their perceived medicinal value. Physical activity, gardening, carrying water, and tending animals is structured into the day, maintaining health and vigor. Observation of the body's condition, along with careful attention to routine, forms the basis of a preventive approach that is both practical and patient. Even the smallest acts of attention are important. You notice a monk inspecting the clarity of water drawn from the well, removing leaves or sediment before it enters the kitchen. You see careful labeling of medicines, monitoring of expiration or potency, and coordination of tasks to ensure that no part of the routine is neglected. These repetitive actions, often overlooked by casual observers, accumulate over months and years to sustain both health and life. As evening descends, the monastery settles into its rhythm of reflection and quiet work. Infusions steep overnight, records are updated, and floors and tools are cleaned in preparation for the next day. The routine itself becomes a protective force, structuring both time and labor in ways that reduce risk and preserve knowledge. The monk's patient, repetitive labor creates continuity across generations, ensuring that both practical skills and experiential wisdom are transmitted carefully. Yet the practice of medicine within the monastery is not without uncertainty. Despite careful observation and diligent preparation, some patients succumb to illness. Crops may fail despite the gardener's best efforts. Visitors may introduce unexpected ailments. The monks accept these limitations with quiet humility, understanding that their methods increase chances of survival but cannot guarantee it. The lesson of patience and observation is constant. Survival is incremental, built from attention to detail, repetition, and a willingness to learn from each day's outcomes. As you leave the infirmary and step into the gardens at twilight, you may reflect on the silent persistence of knowledge here. Every poultice prepared, every observation recorded, and every routine repeated is part of a larger system that sustains both life and understanding. The monastery demonstrates that survival, particularly in times of uncertainty and limited resources, relies on meticulous attention to ordinary tasks, patience with the slow accumulation of experience, and the quiet transmission of knowledge across generations. And as you close the day, one lingering thought emerges. How much of modern understanding of health, hygiene, and the cautious use of natural remedies owes its origins to these repetitive, patient practices, developed quietly in cloisters and gardens, long before formal science could codify their observations. As the monastery moves through the cycles of day and night, you begin to see the full measure of its quiet influence. The gardens, kitchens, workshops, and infirmary are no longer separate spaces. They are interconnected layers of survival, observation, and knowledge. In this final section, you explore how the labor, methods, and routines of the monastery extend beyond its walls, leaving enduring imprints on the surrounding communities and shaping the survival strategies of generations to come. The day begins with the slow ringing of the bell, signaling the start of morning prayers. The monks gather in the cloister, moving in unison along stone pathways, their steps measured and deliberate. These movements are more than ritual. They reinforce a shared rhythm that structures the labor of the day. As soon as prayers conclude, the gardeners disperse to tend herbs, vegetables, and flowers, while other monks enter the kitchens, apothecary, or workshops. You notice how each task, performed repeatedly over decades, becomes almost instinctive, yet always guided by observation and attention. Brother Anselm walks through the herb garden, checking leaves for signs of disease, pests, or nutrient deficiency. The observations are carefully noted in the notebook he has maintained for years. These records are not only practical but instructive. They form a repository of knowledge about local climate, soil conditions, and the seasonal behaviors of plants. Each generation of monks builds upon these observations, refining methods and sharing insights with newcomers. The work is slow, deliberate, and to outsiders seemingly mundane, but the accumulated wisdom is invaluable. In the infirmary, Brother Gerard continues to care for patients, both monks and occasional villagers. Remedies are prepared with the same care observed for years. Poultices, infusions, and compresses are crafted according to precise measures. Yet beyond the immediate task of treating illness, the monks teach those who seek help how to maintain their own health. They demonstrate methods of cleaning, preparing food safely, and observing symptoms. You notice that the impact of these lessons extends far beyond the cloister. Families who adopt these methods increase their survival chances, creating a ripple effect that benefits the wider community. The kitchens, too, function as centers of both sustenance and learning. Monks prepare meals in predictable routines, stretching supplies to last through periods of scarcity. Herbs are incorporated for flavor and medicinal purposes. Baking, boiling, and roasting are executed with meticulous attention to detail. Children and apprentices observe, learning not only cooking techniques, but also patience, measurement, and the understanding that careful preparation of food is inseparable from health. Every action, repeated daily, becomes part of a larger system that preserves both nourishment and knowledge. One particularly striking aspect is the integration of observation into every task. In the garden, in the infirmary, and in the kitchen, small changes are carefully recorded: a leaf curling, a symptom improving or worsening, a recipe slightly modified to adapt to seasonal variations. This practice transforms ordinary labor into a form of slow research, a subtle accumulation of knowledge that grows more valuable with each passing year. You realize that the monastery functions as a living laboratory, where survival itself shapes methodology, observation, and memory. Beyond the walls, villagers increasingly rely on the monastery's guidance. They adopt herbal remedies, consult monks about health, and observe routines that improve daily life. Knowledge that originated within the cloister gradually spreads through demonstration and oral instruction. Markets benefit from increased awareness of hygiene, families preserve food more carefully, and local healers integrate monastic techniques into their practice. These small transmissions, often unnoticed at the time, contribute to the long-term resilience of rural communities. Yet, life in the monastery is not without uncertainty. Weather can damage crops, disease can strike unexpectedly, and social or political pressures can disrupt routines. The monks respond with patient adaptation, emphasizing consistency, observation, and the repetition of proven practices. They accept that survival is incremental, built from small, measured actions repeated over time rather than single heroic efforts. Every sweep of the floor, every careful harvest, every recorded observation is part of a larger strategy for enduring the unknown. As evening falls, you notice the monastery settling into quiet order. Fires are banked, herbs stored, and tools cleaned. The gardens rest under the fading light, and the bells signal the final prayers of the day. In this moment, the connection between labor, observation, and survival becomes clear. The mundane acts of care and repetition that fill the day are what preserve both life and knowledge. Each generation builds upon the experience of those before, ensuring continuity even when external circumstances are harsh. The monastery's influence extends across decades. The practices developed here, systematic observation, careful preparation of remedies, structured labor, and the transmission of knowledge, become embedded in surrounding communities. These routines shape the approaches to agriculture, medicine, and household management for generations, long before formal scientific understanding codifies the principles. In subtle ways, the quiet labor of monks contributes to the evolution of practices that eventually inform broader societal strategies for survival and well-being. And as you leave the cloister, reflecting on the rhythms of work, care, and observation, one lingering thought emerges: how many of the practical lessons born from centuries of patient, repetitive labor, seemingly mundane and insignificant, shaped the resilience of medieval communities and laid the foundation for the knowledge we now take for granted. In the silent dedication of these monks, survival was not dramatic but enduring, and their impact, though quiet, is far-reaching. You step now into the bustling yet subtle world of a medieval inn, a place where travelers, merchants, and locals converge, and where ordinary routines conceal complex systems of survival, economy, and social order. Unlike the cloisters you visited previously, the inn is chaotic by comparison. Scents of cooked meats and stale ale mingle in the air. The clatter of wooden utensils and boots echoes along uneven stone floors, and yet beneath this apparent disorder exists a careful network of routines designed to sustain the inn's operations, ensure the safety of guests, and protect the livelihood of the innkeepers. In this section you will follow the rhythms of life that make such an establishment function, in a time when resources are finite, rules are informal, and survival depends on subtle observation. The inn sits on a well-traveled road connecting market towns, its wooden beams darkened by smoke and years of use. Outside, travelers arrive with carts, pack animals, or on foot, carrying goods for trade or messages from distant regions. The innkeeper, Master Aldrich, moves deliberately between the courtyard, stables, and main hall, ensuring that horses are fed, rooms are clean, and meals are prepared. Each task is carried out according to routines honed over decades, for an inn's reputation and its survival depends on consistency and attention to detail. Within the stables, you notice the careful attention paid to animals. Horses are groomed, fed, and watered on precise schedules. Straw bedding is replaced daily to minimize disease and maintain hygiene. The stable hands observe the animals for signs of fatigue, injury, or illness, noting even subtle changes that could affect a traveler's journey or the inn's income. This meticulous care ensures that the inn maintains reliability, as a damaged or ill horse can disrupt trade routes and erode trust among customers. In the main hall, the rhythm of hospitality is carefully orchestrated. Tables are scrubbed, benches are arranged to accommodate both locals and travelers, and fires are stoked to provide warmth. Meals, though simple, are prepared with attention to nutrition and efficiency. Bread, pottage, roasted meats, and seasonal vegetables form the staple fare, with herbs added for flavor and preservation. Serving is performed systematically. Plates and cups are cleaned, and leftovers stored in ways that minimize spoilage. Every small action is part of a system that maximizes resources while ensuring satisfaction and safety. The inn also functions as a subtle hub of information. Merchants and travelers exchange news about markets, roads, and regional politics. Messages about distant villages or sudden outbreaks of illness are passed quietly from one visitor to another. The innkeeper, experienced and observant, notes patterns: which routes are safe, which travelers are reliable, which groups may carry disease. These observations are recorded mentally or on scraps of parchment, forming a network of knowledge that helps guide both the inn's operations and the wider community. Guest rooms, though modest, follow routines designed to maintain hygiene and comfort. Bedding is replaced regularly, floors swept, and walls cleaned with vinegar or scented herbs to reduce odors and potential disease. Locks and keys are managed carefully, and valuables are stored discreetly to protect guests. Even in seemingly trivial acts, arranging a broom, airing a window, rotating firewood, there is a logic aimed at prolonging both comfort and survival. You notice how repetition and observation, previously highlighted in monastic settings, are equally crucial here. The inn relies on consistent routines to sustain life, livelihood, and reputation. Behind the scenes, apprentices and assistants carry out repetitive tasks that are essential but invisible to most visitors. They chop wood, haul water, clean utensils, mend linens, and sweep floors, all under the watchful eye of experienced staff. Each repeated action ensures that the inn functions smoothly, prevents waste, and reduces the risk of contamination or conflict. The young workers learn slowly, through observation and correction, that survival in this environment depends as much on diligence and care as on any individual skill. Even the innkeeper's financial management is shaped by routine observation. He tracks debts, monitors the flow of goods, and anticipates demand based on seasons, festivals, and the movements of merchants. This practical attention to detail ensures the inn's long-term viability, illustrating how seemingly mundane record-keeping underpins both economic survival and community stability. Outside in the courtyard, travelers and locals interact under a subtle code of behavior. Children help carry water or firewood, merchants haggle over goods, and strangers are observed carefully by both inn staff and townspeople. You notice that social order relies on repetition. Greetings, payments, and seating arrangements follow predictable patterns that reduce conflict and enhance efficiency. The inn becomes a microcosm of medieval society, balancing hospitality, labor, and observation in a way that ensures continuity even amid uncertainty. As night falls, fires are banked, animals stabled, and rooms prepared for the next day. The innkeeper walks the hallways quietly, checking doors and windows, ensuring that small details have not been overlooked. Each gesture, though minor, accumulates to form a reliable system of care and safety. Life within the inn continues in a rhythm dictated by observation, repetition, and practical necessity, a world of quiet order hidden beneath apparent chaos. And yet, even with these routines, uncertainty remains. Travelers may arrive sick or hostile, markets may fail, or storms may destroy supplies. The inn's survival depends not on luck alone, but on the consistent, measured repetition of everyday tasks, and the careful observation of patterns in both human and natural behavior. You may leave the hallways and stables reflecting on this subtle truth. Ordinary repetitive work, carried out patiently and attentively, forms the backbone of survival in a world that offers no guarantees. As the candles burn low, one lingering question arises. How many of the survival strategies, social observations, and practical routines developed in inns like this shaped the resilience of medieval trade networks and local communities, long before formal regulations or laws codified such practices? As the inn moves into its second day, you begin to notice the intricate rhythms that sustain its operation. Beyond the apparent chaos of travelers' voices and clattering utensils, a precise system of labor and observation maintains safety, hygiene, and economic survival. In this section, you follow the innkeepers, apprentices, and supporting staff as they navigate a world where attention to detail, repetition, and quiet vigilance determine not only comfort, but the ability to endure in a precarious medieval economy. The morning begins with the stable hands tending the horses and pack animals. Each animal receives careful attention. Hooves, inspected for injury, coats brushed to remove dirt and parasites, and water measured to ensure adequate hydration without waste. Straw bedding is replaced, and manure removed to reduce odor and the risk of disease. Small details such as a horse's appetite or unusual behavior are meticulously noted by the staff. These observations are vital, as even a single sick horse can disrupt travel routes, delay trade, and diminish the inn's reputation. You notice that the hands who care for animals are trained not only in physical labor but in quiet observation, turning repetition into expertise over time. In the kitchens, a similar rhythm unfolds. Apprentices chop wood and vegetables, stir pots, and tend fires under the watchful eyes of senior cooks. Meals are prepared with an economy of both ingredients and time. Soups and stews are stretched with grains and seasonal vegetables, while herbs are added for flavor and their perceived medicinal properties. Every ingredient is measured, cooked, and served according to routines honed over years. Even a small lapse, a burnt pot of porridge or a neglected fire, could reduce supplies or waste precious fuel. The repetition of these tasks, though monotonous, ensures consistency and sustains both nourishment and survival. The innkeeper, Master Aldrich, supervises the flow of activity with careful attention. He moves between the hall, the stables, and the storerooms, noting what supplies are running low, which rooms are occupied, and which travelers require particular attention. His mind constantly observes patterns: which routes are safe, which merchants are trustworthy, and which visitors may introduce illness. These mental records are supplemented with simple written notes on scraps of parchment. Observation, repetition, and cautious anticipation are at the core of his daily work, allowing him to manage uncertainty while maintaining the inn's reputation. Guest rooms are cleaned and prepared with systematic care. Bedding is aired and replaced, floors swept, and windows opened or adjusted for ventilation. Toward the evening, the inn prepares for new arrivals, inspecting doors and locks, ensuring that valuables are stored discreetly, and placing clean utensils and cups in each room. Repetition is crucial here. Each action performed consistently reduces the likelihood of theft, disease, or discomfort. Guests rarely see these details, yet their presence defines the quality and survival of the inn. In the hall, interactions between travelers, locals, and staff are guided by subtle patterns of social behavior. Seating arrangements follow implicit rules, exchanges are regulated by timing and observation, and disputes are diffused through predictable gestures and reminders. Children help by carrying water or firewood, learning the rhythm of the inn through repetition. Merchants adjust their behavior to align with established routines, whether in trade negotiations, payment, or meals. This quiet adherence to custom and observation ensures that the inn functions smoothly despite the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Observation extends beyond the physical environment to the health and well-being of patrons. Travelers may arrive exhausted, hungry, or ill. The inn staff, trained by experience, notice subtle signs: pale complexions, coughing, feverish behavior, or limping. Remedies are offered discreetly: herbal infusions, warm bedding, or advice on rest. The inn functions as a microcosm of care and survival, mediating between risk and comfort. Even simple practices, like washing utensils or airing rooms, are layered with purpose, balancing hospitality and the prevention of disease. Economic survival is deeply intertwined with these routines. Master Aldrich keeps meticulous mental records of debts, barter agreements, and supply inventories. He anticipates seasonal demand, tracking which travelers will arrive, what provisions are likely to be consumed, and when restocking is necessary. Each repeated calculation, though ordinary, allows the inn to maintain solvency and continuity in a world where disruptions, plagues, floods, or political unrest can quickly threaten livelihoods. The repetitive tasks of observation, measurement, and record-keeping form the foundation of long-term stability. As dusk approaches, the inn slowly transitions into its evening routines. Fires are banked, rooms prepared for new guests, animals stabled, and floors swept once more. The inn becomes a quiet, controlled environment amidst the wider uncertainty of medieval travel. Observation and repetition, practiced daily, are not just labor, they are survival strategies. The rhythm of work sustains not only the inn's physical infrastructure, but also the health and safety of everyone who depends upon it. Even so, uncertainty remains. Travelers may carry sickness, storms may delay trade, and resources can run low unexpectedly. The inn's resilience depends entirely on the repeated, meticulous attention to detail, the cumulative knowledge acquired over years, and the ability of the staff to adapt without abandoning routine. In this environment, survival is incremental and relies on the subtle accumulation of expertise and care, rather than any single dramatic intervention. And as the night settles over the courtyard, one question lingers. How much of medieval society's resilience, trade efficiency, and public health relied on the quiet, repetitive labor and observation carried out in inns like this, long before formal regulation or scientific understanding codified these practices? As night deepens over the inn, the rhythms of daily life reveal their full significance. What once seemed chaotic, the clamor of travelers, the smell of cooking, the shuffle of boots on stone, now appears as a carefully orchestrated system of labor, observation, and subtle social management. In this final section, you witness how the inn's routines not only sustain survival for those within its walls, but extend outward, influencing local economies, travel networks, and community resilience in ways both practical and enduring. The innkeeper, Master Aldrich, walks through the hall, checking each table, chair, and window. Guests are settled, fires banked, and rooms prepared for the next wave of arrivals. Even the smallest tasks, the folding of bedding, the positioning of utensils, the inspection of locks, have consequences for survival and reputation. The repetition of these actions over decades transforms ordinary labor into a repository of knowledge. You notice that the inn's success does not depend on luck or chance. It is the cumulative effect of measured, consistent attention to both people and environment. The stables, too, exemplify quiet endurance. Horses and pack animals are fed, groomed, and watered, their health carefully monitored. Stable hands anticipate needs, noticing subtle shifts in behavior, appetite, or gait. A sick horse or neglected animal could disrupt trade, delay travelers, or reduce income. The attentive repetition of routine prevents such losses. Observation, combined with predictable labor, becomes the backbone of the inn's reliability. In the kitchens, meals are prepared and served with practiced care. Apprentices continue to chop, stir, and tend fires, learning by repetition and observation. Herbs are incorporated for both flavor and perceived medicinal benefit, demonstrating the overlap of nourishment and healing. Food preparation is not merely sustenance, it is a structured strategy for survival, ensuring that every traveler and household dependent on the inn leaves nourished and healthy enough to continue their journey. The inn's influence reaches beyond its walls through knowledge transfer and social connections. Merchants, travelers, and local families carry with them subtle lessons learned in the hallways and stables, which routes are safest, which measures prevent illness, and how careful management of supplies can mitigate scarcity. Oral transmission spreads these practices into surrounding villages, forming a web of resilience grounded in observation, repetition, and practical experience. Even simple behaviors, washing utensils, tending animals, storing food, become part of the local culture, reinforcing survival in ways that historians rarely document. Economic survival is another outcome of persistent, deliberate work. Master Aldrich monitors debts, inventories, and trade agreements, anticipating fluctuations in supply and demand. He tracks seasonal travel patterns, adjusting staffing and resources accordingly. These routines, repeated daily and refined over years, ensure that the inn remains a reliable hub in a fragile medieval economy. Observing this, you realize that what appears mundane, counting coins, checking stock, sweeping floors, carries profound consequences for the continuity of life, community, and commerce. The social fabric within the inn is maintained through subtle, repeated patterns. Seating arrangements, meal schedules, and the timing of service create predictability for both staff and guests. This predictability reduces conflict, facilitates cooperation, and allows the inn to function smoothly despite unpredictable visitors and circumstances. Even the smallest act, offering a polite nod to a traveler or distributing bread efficiently, contributes to the overall stability of the community. Despite the careful routines, uncertainty remains a constant presence. Illness, bad weather, political unrest, or shortages can disrupt the inn's delicate balance. Yet the repeated practices of labor, observation, and structured care create a system that is resilient to these challenges. Survival is incremental, built from the careful accumulation of knowledge, the disciplined execution of routine, and the vigilant monitoring of both human and environmental factors. By nightfall, the inn rests, yet the echoes of its influence persist. Travelers carry experience and information into distant villages. Apprentices learn lessons that shape their future roles, and the meticulous labor of the staff continues to safeguard both people and resources. The inn, though ordinary in appearance, functions as a living repository of practical knowledge and communal resilience. Its quiet influence extends far beyond its walls, shaping survival strategies across towns, trade routes, and generations. As you leave the courtyard, one lingering thought remains. How many of the social customs, hygienic practices, and survival strategies embedded in medieval inns became foundational elements of community resilience and trade, quietly influencing daily life for centuries, long before formalized regulation or scientific reasoning could explain their effectiveness?